Kia ora tātou, nā mai haere mai. Ki te mihi nui, great, good to see you here. Apparently you're used to ECAN stuff, you used to be one. It's good to see you. Good one. So we're looking forward to that submission. Megan, so Megan will do karakia and then we'll get going.
Morning everyone. So whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kinekina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, I hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, te hei, mauri ora.
Kia ora, kia Māori kia tū, kia Māori kia ora, whanau, haere mai te toki, which means let's get going. Just your button, Greg, thanks. Ko te poho o tamatia te matua iwi I tū mai rā, ko o pāwahu te awa I reri ana, ko nā tangata o te tiriti o Waitangi te iwi, kai te mahi te kohaka o tū heitara, ko o tautahi, kaiki I nai nei, ko Greg Byrnes toku ingoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Greg Byrnes. I was born in Christchurch and I've lived here most of my life. I'm here because I think it's important to come and face you, ka nohi ki te ka nohi. I want to declare that I'm an interested ratepayer who has some understanding of Environment Canterbury, having worked here as the Regional Park Planner. I'm a member of the Environmental Defence Society in Forest and Bird, a professional environmentalist and proudly a member of the Syddall Socialist and Motorcycle Enthusiast Society. At the time of my online submission, I had tended to add my voice to sort of that cacophony that ECAN can't or won't, but perhaps I was letting it get to me on the day. But I realise that local and regional government have small issues around the edges and making significant changes that of central government. Therefore, if I want to see change, I will focus submitting with the treaty partners, i.e. the Crown and Tangata Whenua, less so with ECAN and Christchurch City Council. However, I have about another 9 minutes, so I'm going to say something, although it feels a little bit like Groundhog Day. Having said that, I do support the Council's preferred option number 1. You've identified 8 key areas in the LTP, and I acknowledge that some of these are very good, relating to climate change, transport, enviro, schools, biodiversity, and the water issues we face, but I don't believe you go far enough. When it comes to protecting and enhancing fresh water, this is the biggest failing of ECAN and the lobby group heavy zone committees. However, I am optimistic with central government's national direction on fresh water to mana o te wai, including the priority projects, especially the training for regulatory groups addressing the need to provide guidance and support to ensure we grow a collective understanding of what it means to meet the needs of fresh water first. If that was the case, I don't believe the Mayfield Hines Valletta consent would have gone through. Mind you, anything is better than Nick Smith's sham swimmable rivers policy. The only way we're really going to make change is to stop issuing consents in over-allocated areas. In fact, I think we should start rescinding consents in the areas where recidivist holders constantly breach. We're not helping either with that rolling over of the big massive irrigation schemes that were originally rammed through against public opposition in 2010 after ECAN was sacked. I did some basic sums based on Dairy New Zealand and Statistics New Zealand. The average dairy cow excretes 25 litres of urine per day. That's 1.2 million cows, dairy cows in Canterbury alone. That's 30 million litres of urine a day, 210 million litres a week, or 10,920,000,000 litres per year. A reminder, great Fred Cook, we can live without milk, we can't live without water. Reducing emissions. Again, as my last submission, I applaud ECAN for their work around the air zones and clean heat. We've certainly come a long way from the coal-smoked winter nights which I experienced growing up. However, many in our community struggle with electricity costs. I think that ECAN should have a community account where the people of Canterbury can buy their power at discounted rates, because if it's good enough for an aluminium smelter, it's good enough for the citizens. I also support subsidising public transport, that we have a win-win, where we reduce emissions, more people move efficiently around the greater city, and bus drivers have a fair wage and working conditions. You can help through contracts. I would also like to see ECAN advocate for public and freight rail and inter-islander shipping and freight movement. The reduction of vehicles on the road is an imperative. Compliance. You state that compliance is another key area. With the reluctance to enforce under the auspices or pretense of wanting to educate people, what does that mean? That means that the environment continues to suffer a death by 1,000 cuts. All of these breaches are cumulative. Only last summer we had an item in the press where an ECAN employee stating in relation to the Northern Pegasus Bay bylaw, quote, education was the main tool used when dealing with beach offending as prosecution was expensive and complicated. Climate change. Signing the climate emergency declaration means nothing without emergency action. The coast is under threat from, on one side, climate change impacting higher sea levels and adverse events, and on the other, decreasing levels of water which are heavily polluted. While there will be an eventual retreat from the coast in many areas of Canterbury, we can mitigate much of this initial impact by supporting local communities with dune and coastal wetland restoration and preparation. I support the initiative for Braided River Revival and the region-wide tree planting program Me Uru Rako, being key elements of your work in Canterbury to restore natural ecosystems and improve biodiversity. I know of some land squeeze between two braided rivers in North Canterbury that are always looking for trees to support off-river braided bird habitat, but I'm not here in that role. Building community engagement. This is one of the most difficult areas in any organisation. Everyone has an opinion, but we only normally hear them when a decision has been made or a project's about to be started. I feel that council, though, are worried about the optics at times rather than meaningful engagement. The time for sitting around holding hands with everyone's long gone. Heads up, doesn't matter what you do. There will always be someone that doesn't agree with you. There will always be someone that doesn't like you. We only need to look back the past decade when the Crown, with their thirst for economic development, rode roughshod over ECAN, and yet they were still elected. Oh yes, and I see you nodding, Judy. You're not going to like this one though. When it comes to optics, you were quoted in the press last week as saying proposed rate rises were not as bad as they looked, with the actual dollar figure comparatively little for most ratepayers, especially in Christchurch. It's not really a good look, as there are people who battle with low or fixed incomes, unbudgeted costs, and a few extra dollars a week is significant for these people. I'm fortunate that I'm not one of those, financially I'm talking about. While I'm here, I want to voice my support for two general across the region Māori seats on council. I believe they should be elected by Māori rather than appointed by Tron. However, I'm confident that Mana Whena would get the support anyway. I congratulate ECAN and acknowledge the enormous benefit of the Tuia youth raw pool programs. I still haven't forgiven the Merrill Forum for their complicitous behaviour in the sacking of the then ECAN councillors and support for the national government's neoliberal agenda. Environment Canterbury have some great initiatives, including, as I've said, the Tuia and Youth Forum, and I really appreciate the networking for the environment. It has fantastic people within its ranks, whether it be Joe or Bronwyn at the front desk, Zipporah in biodiversity, Adrian in water, Len in transport, Tony in Viro schools. The list goes on and on. But good people need good leadership, and I want you to always look and ask yourselves, are you those good leaders? In conclusion, I support the Council's preferred option number 1. I am opposed to loan funding on services and loading future generations with debt for our inaction to date. But people also need to understand that the action proposed are really just a start. As the great Norman Kirk famously said, there are 4 things that matter to people. They have to have somewhere to live, they have to have food to eat, they have to have clothing to wear, and they have to have something to hope for. Your role in giving future generations hope is to act now on the environmental emergencies in Waitaha. Tama tū, tama ora, tama moi, tama mata. Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks, Greg, for that. Pretty straight shooting from your end of the table. Questions? Councillor Edge, Councillor Farm, and then Councillor Huey.
not really a question, but I just wanted to make sure that this this document you've given us is, and your conversation is tabled.
I've got copies. So thank you.
And noted. Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks for your submission, Greg. I wanted to just pick up on your support for the restoration and regeneration aspects of the plan, and I wondered if you would comment, because I know in that land squeeze between two braided rivers and your other role, you know, there's a real mix of protection and regeneration, and I guess as a council we're just wrestling with how much of our resource to put into protection versus regeneration. I wondered if you had any thoughts or comments on how that works as a package.
There's been some very good work done in identifying key biodiversity habitat throughout Canterbury, especially on the coastline. And I just made the comment outside in the foyer, like every other environmental organisation or trust in New Zealand, we too applied for Mahi for Nature. We haven't heard back yet. So because you're competing all the time, I think what you need to do is identify the ones with the highest values that you can put the least amount of resource. It's kind of like triaging when you have a civil defence emergency. I think you can make your dollars go a lot further if you actually are looking at things that are well established or have the guts of something that you can work through, rather than an example with Waikirikiri anyway is everyone knows there's little pockets of kānuka out there, remnant kānuka from the Waikirikiri. If you don't, there is, and they're really cool. The problem being they're surrounded now by grassland for predominantly dairying, and this is not a knock at dairying, clear, but unfortunately, they're like little museums now. They can't expand. It's very difficult for them to regenerate anywhere other than where they are in the site because you're reluctant to take anything down to give them space. So they're kind of like little museums and they're very expensive versus somewhere like you might have the work that Miles Giller does with home landowners where they might have a gully. I know over at Wairewa's farm, for example, at Tumbledown Bay, I've done some work with the runanga there. They've got a couple of gullies that have got some really good native growing in it, amongst it some gorse, etc. But it's actually a lot easier to fix that, if you like, with limited resource. I hope that answers what you're...
Yes, good morning, Greg. Thanks very much for coming in and making your submission. We really appreciate that, even though I understand your comments about the relationship between central government and us. I'm really interested if you elaborate a little bit more about what you actually mean by meaningful engagement, because I think it's often we don't ask people for more details. What are your experiences meaningful engagement?
Well, I've been very fortunate to have worked for Te Kohaka or Te Heitara in North Canterbury over the last, I think I'm coming up to 11 years. And prior to that with Environment Canterbury, and prior to that with Waimakariri District Council. And a number of the people that I was fortunate to associate with, Rick Toe, John O'Crofts, you had Ngāti or Bob Ty, used to be your liaison here in the office. That kanohi ki te kanohi principle of being out and going is what it's about. And I struggle too, because I've been a council employee officer where you're trying to have, you know, you book the local hall and you get all excited. It's like you're the, I hope everyone likes me, and someone turns up and there's 5 people drinking cups of tea and you find out they all work for Environment Canterbury when you walk in the room. I understand it's difficult. I wish I had a silver bullet, sort of panacea, this is what you do. But what I would say is connecting, going out. Johnny used to say to me, Greg, they'll turn on you. And I'd go, what? What? I haven't done anything. He goes, you don't need to. But if you're there face to face and they know who you are over a long period of time, they collectively too, I'm presuming, were, in this case, Ngāti Ahuriri, they'll know who you are. They'll know what you stand for over time. But if you letter in the mailbox or your phone call or you do whatever, and I'm using that as an example because it's no different for Pākehā either or anyone in our community, you get the best engagement. And clear, not to generalise and poke fun at the rural community, but we also learn very quickly that when you're a city boy and you go out, there's a guy standing with the Massey Ferguson between you. Don't go around the other side and get in his face. Give him plenty of space to talk to, and you're going to get more out of him than you are, you know. And that's really what it's about. Going, knowing people, and people then will know who you are, you know.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for your submission. We're out of time, so well done. And that'd be good if you left that there. So I'm just looking for our next presenter, Caroline. Is Caroline here? Caroline, thank you. Just when you're ready, Caroline, you can kick off. Push your button, please, on the right. Yep.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Caroline Syddall. I grew up in Christchurch, taking swimmable rivers and drinkable streams for granted. I'm very concerned about the decline in the health of our waterways and about the impending impacts of climate change. I am keen to see strategic actions to address these issues implemented as soon as possible, with brave decisions being made now. We must consider those that come after us when making decisions, but we also have to consider ourselves. The impacts of environmental degradation and climate change are with us already. They're not just issues for the future, but they will affect us for the rest of our lives. To this end, I support option 1 of the long-term plan. The transformational opportunities listed are core goals in this time of rapid climate change and a severely damaged environment. I think option 1 acknowledges the situation we're in, makes a serious attempt to address it, and that anything less is an abrogation of our responsibilities to the environment and all of us living in it. Specifically, I support the extension of environmental education, particularly with respect to civic engagement and Environ Schools program. I also wish to see the continuation of the on-demand buses trials in Timaru and the principle of extending this to parts of Christchurch. Further support for the revival of our unique braided rivers, ongoing tree planting, both for biodiversity values and carbon sequestration, improved data collection and sharing, as well as support for greater landowner compliance and for community biodiversity enhancement projects. Now, to address some of the plan's portfolios, regional and strategic leadership. I support the Tuia partnership with Ngāi Tahu as a fundamental recognition of Ngāi Tahu's mana whenua status and our treaty partnership responsibility. I salute ECAN's leadership in this area. Freshwater. Clearly, we've got this seriously wrong, or Ngāi Tahu wouldn't feel the need to take the Crown to court for rangatiratanga of our freshwater. We know that inappropriate farming practices have done long-term damage to our waterways, and while some farmers are taking our farming responsibilities, others are simply taking the mick and hiding behind general claims of improvements in the industry. We need more work in education, monitoring, regulation and consequences, i.e. prosecutions here. ECAN is continuing to over-allocate water on the plains, which supports agriculture which is completely inappropriate for the soil type and natural water supply, and which continues to cause damage to our aquifers and water quality. If you can't prevent over-allocation for schemes like the Mayfield-Hines-Valletta irrigation scheme because the RMA allows it to happen, my question to you is whether you are talking hard to central government to get this addressed in changes to environmental legislation. If you think this level of water allocation is acceptable, I ask you to reconsider and to prioritise the environment on which our future, including our economic future, relies. Prioritise te mana o te wai. I read your stuff about the Hines Managed Aquifer Recharge project and watched the video, and it's very impressive engineering, but if it's taking engineering on this scale to solve a problem, then you're addressing the wrong problem. This scheme addresses the consequences of water over-allocation rather than going back to the root cause of the problem, the over-allocation and overuse itself. I also acknowledge that we have work to do within our urban catchments and would like to see ECAN work constructively with the City Council to address issues of urban runoff, pollution and sediment. Climate change and community resilience. There's a strong need for education here in the face of continuing apathy. I felt the plan could do with more reference to working with central government and the city and district councils, as climate change is already a significant issue for coastal and flood or fire-prone areas, that is most of Canterbury, including its major cities. The coastal environment, I think we need a stronger focus here. The concept of ki uta ki tai must more obviously include our coastal environments. We need to make these links clearer. upstream actions lead to downstream effects and coastal pollution. Urban transportation. I really like the use of your word transform here. That's what we need, a transformed public transport system, along with the reshaping of our urban spaces to promote walkable and accessible towns and cities, and I appreciate that the latter is more of the City Council's role. The concept of a 15-minute city is one that I think councils within Greater Christchurch should be considering. I think that COVID-19 has made transforming bus usage more difficult in the short term as more people avoid public transport, but we must plan now for the medium term, get the systems, infrastructure and services in place for when it becomes urgent, as climate change, peak oil and an ageing population will make it very soon. On a personal note here, I would like to suggest that decision makers and information disseminators around public transport within ECAN only be those who are regular public transport users themselves. They are more likely to understand the needs and frustration of bus commuters. I've had a couple of really patronising replies to my input as a bus user, and I found that pretty unhelpful. Finally, funding. I would actually support more borrowing to advance the long-term plan goals. I appreciate that this would be creating a cost for people in the future, but with the climate crisis, insufficient action now will create a significantly larger future burden for people.
Thank you, Caroline. Can I just remind councillors that their questions should be of clarification. Councillor Clearwater.
Thank you very much for your submission, Caroline. Just in terms of clarification, you used the term for around the air quality transport and urban development portfolio that you'd like to see better shaped community and service hubs. Just wondered if you might expand on how the shape of some of our hubs could be to achieve what you were referring to.
It's related to the idea of the 15-minute city, that cities are shaped so that people can get to their core services within a 15-minute walk. And I think we need to have reducing car usage, and we need to support people who are less mobile, and I think that's the way the city needs to be. We can't continue to have a spread out city where you have to go miles and miles to get to services or to work.
Councillor Selwyn, Councillor Annes.
Thank you. You mentioned enviro schools bringing value, and I just wondered if you could expand a little bit on what value you see enviro schools having.
I see enviro schools obviously as having a major education role, and I think for me the point here is that we're not suggesting that environment Canterbury be involved in education for the sake of education itself, but that environmental education needs to inform citizens, which will help ECAN achieve its environmental goals, and I think that's absolutely crucial. I think people who are currently aware that there's an environmental crisis and that it affects them are engaged and informed, but there's a lot of people that this environmental crisis already affects who really just do not have that knowledge, and I think enviro schools and the youth engagement group has a really core role there to build that knowledge.
Thanks for your submission. Hey, I was just interested in your comments around the uniform annual general charge. You've said that you support the changes that we're proposing. Would you support it going higher? We've had lots of submissions around that balancing, as you've referred to in terms of target rates. Would you support going higher with the UAGC, or do you think we've set it in the long-term plans about right?
I think it's about right. I haven't looked in huge detail. I was a little concerned to see how much, your example of how much it was a Temuka property owner with a house half the value of the Christchurch one would have a greater rates rise. I do have concerns about the equity around that. And that is as someone who owns a property of approximately the Christchurch value that's there and can afford to pay it. So as the previous speaker said, there are equity issues here about people who simply can't afford to pay. I also thought there were a few things where, I can't think of specifics, where you allocated the charges to the people who gain from it most, where I actually thought that many of these environmental issues are more general. We may not have that direct impact or gain from an environmental issue, but more generally we do. So I thought some things I think could be spread a bit wider.
Thank you, Caroline. If there are no more questions, thank you for your submission, and we will move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Te Te Hapū o Ngāti Wheke, and I see Andrew down the back there. Paul was supposed to be with you, Andrew, but he hasn't made it. Yep, right.
Just declaring my conflict.
Conflict with Councillor beforehand. You're ready, just push your button. Thank you, button.
What's your
Thank you.
Ka nui te mihi kia koutou. Greetings to all of you, and thanks on behalf of the people of Ngāti and Ngāti Wheke for the opportunity to make our submissions and to come here and speak to you today. As Peter has said, I'm on my own at this end of the table, so obviously whānau very supportive of the submissions and have had the opportunity to input into them. Paul's not able to be with us today, and as you noted, there are others in the room conflicted, but yeah, so I'm on my own, but representing all of the Hapū and the 8,000 people who whakapapa Ngāti Wheke. You've had the opportunity to read the submissions. First thing, probably from our point of view, is to acknowledge ECAN and the councillors and all of your staff for the way the partnership with Ngāti Wheke's developed over the past few years, and the Whakarepo Catchment Plan has, in our view, provided a vehicle for that partnership to develop. So we worked obviously with the other partners as well, but we worked closely with ECAN to develop the vision for the plan, and then in terms of implementing the plan and jointly appointing Karen Banwell to help coordinate. And over the past few years, we've worked closely with all a wide range of areas of the ECAN team, the Harbour Master, the zone committees, the 2-year funds, and other areas as well. And I think it's really important that it demonstrates the ability to grow a partnership through working together, and that's got us to where we are today. The submissions, I think we see as taking it to the next level, and I guess in some ways there's more complexity, so it's really about how we work together to find ways to implement the regulatory frameworks around the harbour and also the coastal plan, and to do that together in a way that I guess a holistic way, so it's for the those plans can be brought together for the benefit of the harbour environment, the land around it, and obviously everything that lives within it. It's obviously not simple, but I think we're in a position that if ECAN's able to support the Hapū to be to give effect to that partnership and work together, that we can provide a really good model for other catchments around Canterbury, and I guess it's a way of bringing together the wide range of areas that you're required to work together to work in to find a solution for a particular environment area. That's my brief overview. I'm happy to endeavour to answer any questions, but we would appreciate the opportunity, given I don't have complete grasp of all of the subject matter, to be able to receive questions in writing and respond within a day or two to those.
Look, thank you, Andrew, and I understand your nervousness at a bunch of questions coming your way, but they're only for clarification. We have got your submission, which is pretty in-depth in terms of some of the stuff it looks at and asks about, which we will consider in our considerations. But is there anybody that wants to clarify stuff? Councillor Southworth, then Councillor Farm, and then Tumu Young Cranwell.
This might be a question you might need to send an email response into, but I was interested that you suggested to postpone the regional policy statement review, and I just wondered if there were any particular areas within, because that review it's due, it's a policy document and it has its time comes to be reviewed. And usually that's because you think after a period of time there's things that need to be looked at and updated.
I'll save you from that one, Andrew. That's pretty much a leading question, I would have thought, Vicky. There's no clarification sought on that.
It is a clarification in that I would like to know if there are parts of that RPS. So you're proposing to hold it off, but I'm interested to know if there are parts of the RPS or bits, specifics that might be of concern and could do with going through some like a separate chapter review or something else. So there's not a lot of detail in here about what the consequences of not doing that review, albeit that I see that it's cost saving and it would help with the resourcing from your perspective and potentially from ours. So that was my interest. Thank you.
Yeah, and I suspect there'll be some detail around that, and there will be some useful clarification that we might be able to provide around that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Byrnes.
Yeah, thanks for your submission, Andrew. My question was in a similar vein. So if we're going to get a bit more clarification, and we'll no doubt have ongoing conversations about this as well, then I'm okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Tutumu Yang Campbell.
Good, Andrew. Andrew, just on the capacity, you talk about runanga capacity, and then just all these plans come through. So is that you're looking at financial and also people, or?
Well, yeah, it's I guess it's firstly about people, and as you've seen when we've been here in recent months, it's often not been whānau that are at the table, and obviously the long-term aspirations of Te Hapū and Ngāti Wheke, as with other runanga, is that that whānau are able to lead some of these kaupapa, and so we see it as an opportunity to develop whānau, which is really about the long-term partnership. So I think it is about finance potentially to do that, but also working closely with your staff, and you've got you're growing your capacity in terms of staff that have that expertise and that have that whakapapa connection and can do that. So I guess it's probably a combination of those.
And then just on point number 15, you talk about kind of transfer delegation of powers, from Environment Canterbury to the runanga, or it could be doing it together. Would you just see that into monitoring and just around the harbour itself, or would you see it could extend to other areas?
I think that would be a good one to explore, because it could be broader than that, and it may be that something you can start with some of the easier things, and maybe then once you get some of those things achieved, look at some more complex things that might benefit from being done in more of a shared manner or transferred.
One more question, if there is one. Thank you, Andrew. Andrew, the issues that have been brought up have been captured by staff sitting around the table, and we will follow through on that with you and with Paul. So thank you for coming in today.
Kia ora, and thank you all again for the opportunity, and look forward to continuing to work in partnership. Kia ora.
So the next presenter is Laurie Prouting. Welcome, Laurie. You've got 10 minutes, and the button on your right-hand side on that microphone there gives us access to your voice better. So, yeah.
Good morning. I'm a farmer from the Upper Ngāti and a place called Mesopotamia. I'm supported today by my wife of 55 years, and my submission is mainly about the proposed savage increase in rates. About 1957, the then Catchment Board grew exotic trees high up in the Ashburton Gorge, about 4,000 feet above sea level. They grew Pinus contorta and other exotics like silver birch, Douglas fir and other trees on the Mistake Flat and Agony Island in the Havelock River. For those of you who are unaware of the Havelock, this is right at the headwaters Agony Island being probably 4 kilometres from the main divide. Willows and poplar trees in the Arari River tributaries and in many other sites around the region, all in the name of soil conservation, costing millions of rate and taxpayers' funds. Now, most of those plantings are being removed at huge cost, again funded by the above payers. In Mesopotamia, we were able to carry out extensive river protection works without having to go through any costly resource consents. We were able to get a subsidy for these works and enormous help from the board's engineering staff. Today, this work is as strong as ever, not only protecting 1,500 hectares of flats, but an important springwater creek called Deep Stream. This and other projects like it, in my opinion, were sensible, constructive, and achieving. 1st of November 1989, there's a change of name, now called the Canterbury Regional Council. Essentially same horse, but different name and some different policies. They took over our pest control boards. Staff were offered voluntary redundancy, or in our case, were asked to relocate. Took all the community's pest destruction assets, house, land, Gibson carrot cutters, the lot, eventually setting up their own commercial arm called Target Pests. In our particular area, Upper Angataara, we worked tirelessly to keep our hard fought for assets and resident operator, but to no avail. What hurt us most was the way Target Pests then set about price undercutting to try and push other operators out of business, eventually going broke at another huge cost to the taxpayer. I have witnessed many councils and producer boards trying their hand at commercial activity, most if not all going broke. In the civilian commercial world, mistakes are paid for by the owner and they cannot afford to make too many. Now we have ECAN, same horse, different name. They are so used to not having to be accountable and keep on squandering the tax intake and want more. To me, it seems that they make a budget, work out the cost, and if their expense exceed their income, they just ask for more in the way of increasing rates, while their farming income providers look at their budget, see where there is a massive increase in rates and set about cutting back and spending. What is lacking in ECAN today is experienced staff who have had to fight for their income and know how to apply restraint. Some years ago, ECAN sued the Timaru District Council for some problem with sewage and outfall, with the ratepayer picking up both tabs. Surely this could have been handled differently. Some good news. Shortly after the Regional Council became established, residents of the Upper Angataara Gorge set up a residents group, later on called the Upper Angataara Gorge Land Care Group. Out of a total of 12 run holders, 11 joined the group. Our aim is to keep our plant and animal pests under good control on Crown-owned land around us. ECAN were one of our first contributors, giving the group $5,000 seeding funds. Since then, we have canvassed Timaru District Council, Ashburton District Council, DOC, LINZ and RDR. Incidentally, DOC in those early days had the generosity of giving us 1 drum of Trounce, the cheapest glyphosate on the market. Today it's a bit different. RDR, with all these organisations contributing about the same on a yearly basis, with the exception of LINZ, who funded about $30,000 first year, with the increasing amounts well over $100,000 last season. We feel we have transformed our riverbed and surrounding area from one where broom, gorse and wilding trees were spreading in spectacular fashion to one where it is hard to find a single plant today. And if you take on the challenge and you happen to find that single plant, please pull it out. Our group has put in an enormous amount of volunteer time and funding on our riverbeds. While there has been large focus on the rabbit population, hunters have been releasing pigs, adding to our problems. Now wallabies are crossing our natural boundary to two-thumb range from the southern Hapū, Mackenzie Basin area. Our land care group has battled this invasion, and now, thankfully, ECAN is starting to contribute. DOC, whose policy was to use our Rangitata River as a boundary, have now abandoned that idea and are also contributing to keeping this pest out of our catchment. I believe there are quite a number of land care groups like ours throughout the country, yet they get very little recognition for the work they do. I received a letter from ECAN on the 2nd of November 2020 headed Land Use Consent Farm. We did apply some time ago, but the application took some time for ECAN to find it. The letter goes on to say, quote, if we haven't received your application by Friday, the 29th of January 2021, we will consider that the use of land for farming activity on your property is unauthorised and enforcement action will follow. Signed, Zone Manager Ash Byrnes. I put a copy of that letter in here. Communism's aim is to undermine a country by stealth, but this is not stealth. My take on the above, this staff member did not take time to sort out the issue before she came out with guns blazing. This appears to be becoming a disquieting ECAN attitude of trying to become our public masters. This heavy-handed approach would certainly not be tolerated in the civilian world. My letter remains unanswered. Guys, I know you think you understand what you think I said, but I am not sure you realise that what you heard is not what I meant. We must communicate. My note to the group, please show some respect to the income providers that fund your organisation. In the civilian world, respect goes a long way. We need to work together, not against one another. And I've heard other submitters saying the same thing. With good management, the huge mistakes I mentioned above need not have happened, and there would have been surplus funds for all. Please, we do not need ECAN to get involved with commercial activity. We want well thought out policies and restraint on spending. We do not need rate increases of more than inflation, and thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Look, I must say before I start that I have been up and seen the work that you're doing up Upper Rangitata, and congratulations on that. It doesn't go unseen by us. It's just the fact that we don't go up and do that, and we should come up and see what you're doing again. So thank you for that. Now, are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor. Oh yes, just can you, Laurie? Can you leave your submission with us so that we can thank you. Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie. Laurie, these are questions. Oh, sorry. Take a seat. That's it. Fine. Councillor Mackenzie.
Hi, Laurie.
No,
there's two Mackenzies. So, just a question around the wallaby control, which is an issue. In terms of the future, I'd just like to know your sort of opinion about, you talked about the wallaby boards, you know, the various boards. Do you see that as a good structure for controlling things in the future, or do you think they're an outdated sort of concept?
I don't know too much about the I don't know too much about the wallaby board. It's sort of out of our area. We don't come under that umbrella of the wallaby board, but it has been great that a guy from Boffamiscal, Pete Caldwell, who works for Lynn's, has taken up the cry, and ECAN as well, because these wallabies now, you know, in that board area you were talking about, they're getting out of control and they're crossing over the tops and down. There is a good outfit in North Canterbury, I think they call themselves Target Pests, that have come in with modern equipment, heat, what am I trying to say, heat seeking, thermal imaging, so that they can get these animals in. And it is surprising the amount that they are finding, where the average person, and like myself, I'm totally unaware of the problems of wallabies. I wouldn't know sign if I saw them, because they've never been in our area before. But these guys can find that out, and they are doing a very effective control, and I think that we should promote that.
Any other questions? Thank you for taking the time of coming from Mesopotamia and to talk to us. It will be noted. We have got your submission, so thank you. Nicki Murray. As Nicki's online. Can you hear us, Nicki?
Fine. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. Kia ora. I'm Nicki Murray. I'm a project manager and chemical engineer, and I live and work near Dumet. Having previously worked in Wellington, a professional career for 15 years. I manage various change management initiatives for large corporates, including New Zealand Post, Rights and Seeds, and the New Zealand Dairy Board, for example, plus other projects overseas, including in Australia and in Mexico. Along with my husband, we've run a specialist chemical engineering business, although in the last 14 months we haven't been able to travel due to work overseas because of COVID-19 restrictions. Now, can you hear me well enough? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good, thank you. As to the context of my submission, we own a small residential property of 1.8 hectares and also a rural property of 113 hectares, which is predominantly native bush and forest and include the beautiful QE2 covenanted area. The balance of the property is leased out to a neighbouring farmer for dryland grazing. I'm also a part-time beekeeper, and you should be aware that I'm not a farmer and do not claim to represent any farming group. Nonetheless, I do understand some of the priorities, concerns and challenges faced by our friends and neighbours here in our rural North Canterbury community. So I've reviewed your booklet, thank you very much, which uses fantastic aspirational phrases, eloquent words and beautiful images, and is indeed a great advert for the ECAN's long-term plan. However, I find it light on detail, and a lot of the work activities proposed talk about planning and monitoring rather than necessarily a great deal of detail as to what will be planned for or monitored. So I have not read all the supplementary information online, but I just find that there's not a lot of substance to the detail of the plan. The booklet, however, asks for feedback, and particularly regarding affordability, which is the main subject of this submission. I believe that the ECAN's long-term plan proposed options 1 and 2 are both unacceptable on the account of affordability. I believe that the council should look to reduce ECAN's costs, develop an alternative, smaller and less expensive programme of work in order to reduce the burden on taxpayers. So not option 1, not option 2, but a new option 3, which is consistent with ECAN's stated policy of long-term rate rises of less than 5.3%. So why do I think this? Well, firstly, let's look at New Zealand inflation. The proposed average rate increases of 24.5% and 18% respectively are way in excess of the current rate of inflation at 1.5%. And this level of rates increase is unaffordable for most people, particularly those on fixed incomes or who have strained circumstances due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Consider the fact that this year, shortly before the long-term plan was issued for public consultation, the New Zealand government announced that New Zealand superannuation, veterans pension, job seeker support allowance and other such state benefits would increase by 3.1%, quote, in line with the average wage. So many people do not have an extra 24.5% of disposable income in their pockets this year. If we just look at page 11 on the long-term plan, this table here at the bottom indicates the proposed increases year on year. And I have a question for you as the council. Do you really consider that an average Canterbury pensioner can afford to pay a rate rise of 24%, given that their superannuation income is rising by only 3.1% per annum. And then in future years, they will have to pay 9% and then more increases. At the end of 10 years, the average ratepayers' rates will have gone up by 70%, according to your numbers here. So do you have any response on that, or should I leave questions till later?
I will just leave the questions to the end. Thanks, Nicki. Thank you.
Okay. I do note that after years 1 and 2, the proposed rate increases do reduce, but I understand that these figures are indicative only and may not be adhered to, which is what we observe has happened in previous years. So point 2, other rising costs. Unfortunately, paying rates is not optional, and the proposed large rate increases come on top of other non-discretionary costs, which are also going up. I take as an example, Hurunui District Council rates are proposed to increase by 8.49% this next year. In my personal case as a beekeeper, the American Fowl Brood Management Agency have changed the way in which their levies are calculated on beehives and increased their charges so that now this year I am paying 15% more than the previous year. These costs are unaffordable unless I give up beekeeping, which would be detrimental to both our properties and also the properties around us. So in the last year, COVID-19 has prevented us from working on chemical engineering projects. So personally, our company has had to pay for additional technical staff to undertake test work in Australia. And indeed, those whose business is in tourism have seen their income significantly impacted by the lack of overseas visitors. People simply have lots and lots of rising costs and perhaps not any greater income. I think my key point, though, is that I've observed that there are higher increases within ECAN's proposed rates for rural rather than urban. By inspection using ECAN's online rates tool, one can identify that the proposed rate rises are disproportionately skewed on rural residents. This is not immediately obvious from the example properties that are listed here, which are a very small number, I realise, but running additional individual property addresses through the ECAN's online rate calculator, I find that for option 1, year 1, some properties on the inland road near Kaikoura face annual rates rises of 152%. We personally will face rate rises of 37 and 35% on our 2 rural properties here near Cheviot, while our 86-year-old neighbour just down the road faces rises of 28% for her house. By comparison, our friends in Christchurch, who I've asked to look at the tool as well, will see increases of less than 20%, some as little as 11% from the examples that I considered. Your revenue and financing policy states capital value is considered a more equitable basis for a land tax principle. Council considers higher capital value properties will generally be better able to bear the cost of a proportionally higher rate. So let's look at a specific example of higher percentage rate increases on a rural property versus urban property, which appear to contradict the policy I've just spoken to and illustrate the extreme differences rural versus urban. So the example that I took was a house in Fendleton, which has a capital value of 6.8 million. Extreme, I know, but under option 1, it pays an increase of 13.9%, significantly lower than all the properties I looked at in a rural location. And under option 2, an increase of 6.4%. This for someone who definitely would be considered a higher capital value house. Versus the comparison of a $240,000 house in rural Kaikoura on a very small property, pays under option 1 151%, and under option 2 an increase of 145%. Huge. So again, I have a question for you which we'll come to, which is, do you know the exact range of rate increases across the whole of Canterbury under the long-term plan? Specifically, what property and where has the lowest rates increase, and is that indeed actually a reduction? And what is the highest percentage figure? So I would be interested to have that information, please, and would hope that you could provide it to us and all the other councillors. So in summary, I'd say, to be clear, people in our Cheviot community consider it's grossly unfair that ECAN rate rises should be so high on those who live rurally, while urban friends have much smaller percent changes to their rates, notwithstanding the greater range of services available to them in town, for example, public transport, which is simply not available to ourselves, well, based on where we live. At the same time, farmers are facing greater compliance costs, for example, irrigation, resource consents under the user pays model, whilst also best farm pest control, flood protection, water runoff management on their own properties at their own cost, as well as this year once again facing the challenges of an impending drought. For many, continuing to work a farm business is increasingly growing to be too hard, and it's sad to see farms which have been run by successive generations of a family now being sold because the young people feel that it's just not something they wish to take on because of the oversized challenges. So if you can intend to deliberately target farmers, please be aware that lifestyle block owners and rural pensioners and those who chose to move out from Christchurch City after the devastating 2011 earthquake for a better life and to somewhere cheaper are also being impacted. This includes people who rent their homes, as landlords will certainly look to recover rising rate costs from their tenants. So I think one of the challenges that ECAN can face, and really, is to manage the perceived rural versus urban divide by actually responding positively to the views of rural residents. You can do that by indicating that you've heard and understood through this consultation process that the rural people need a voice, even if they are only something like 18% of Canterbury's residents. But I hope you can do that by changing the way rates are distributed so that city residents bear a more share of the total. Decisive action is required in this area to rebuild a more trusting relationship with rural communities. And without being alarmist, I do wish to make the point that the strength of feeling regarding the proposed high rates rises and the perceived unfair split of charges in our rural community is significant. So, in summary, I do have other comments regarding the uniform annual general charge, but I see I've run out of time. So I'll simply conclude, please develop a long-term plan light, or option 3 in my words, which identifies ways to reduce internal costs, delivers the statutory requirements, meeting national government water quality requirements and climate change items. But if you can, please keep rate increases to less than 10% as an overall average, with subsequent years kept low to achieve your target of 5.3% overall. And please consider using a different calculation methodology to apply to each property, which is transparent, equitable and affordable to all Canterbury residents, whether they be rural or urban. Thank you.
Sorry, Nicki, I cut you off there. We got through that all right, and we seem to be able to hear you all right. The question you asked halfway through your submission of us, so I think your point is made in your question, so we won't go there on that, but we will have the opportunity for a couple of questions if councillors have them. Councillor Mackay.
Hi, Nicki. Thank you for your presentation. Very well done. You just mentioned there at the end around that you have some comments around the UAG. I noticed in your submission you put down don't know, but I'm just sensing now you would like an opportunity to make a comment there. It is one of the tools that we can use as a lever to respond to work that is for the public good or people good. So do you have some comment or would you just like to provide some clarity around your views there?
Yes, I do have a question on that. I looked at some information in this area and realised as well. Realised that I support in general the increase in the uniform annual general charge, which is identified on page 26 here, and the move for this charge, which is paid by every property, to now encompass a wider range of activities than in previous years. I think that is a very good thing, as it basically means that everyone is contributing to things that they will benefit from. Nonetheless, I do note from this table that in particular community engagement, internet development, annual long-term planning and annual report are not now to be included in option 1's annual general charge, uniform annual general charge, whereas I would expect them to be, as they impact on and indeed are available to all Canterbury residents. So I was unclear as to why that split had been made in that manner.
Thank you. So we've got one more question from Councillor Farm.
Kia ora, Nicki. Thank you so much for your submission today. My question was really around you've been really clear about there being outrage about the percentages, and we're really hearing that. I guess my question was around, have you looked at within your examples the actual magnitude in dollar increase? So for example, that Fendleton example versus the Kaikoura example, because a lot of the very low properties are coming off a really low rating base. But I'm interested if you're focused on the percentage or if you're looking at the dollar figures as well.
I have looked at both. I'm looking at an Excel spreadsheet in front of me where I have done the analysis. And I did notice that in the document it didn't actually provide percentage increases year on year for the 3 example properties. And I think that's where my focus has sat in terms of looking at inflation, looking at income changes and so on. Is this rise in cost to a ratepayer commensurate with percentage rises in income and outgoings? And I found it wasn't. However, you're quite right in that it is off a low base. So let's please just talk to my personal circumstances. I did look at the numbers for the Kaikoura properties, but let's just look at my rates. And I do agree with you that the actual figures are not a massive increase. For us, our existing rates this current year are $172 for ECAN and proposed for next year's $236 for residential property, which is a rise of some 37%, as I mentioned earlier. For 1298 Blythe Road, which is our property down the road, which is a rural, essentially a forestry block with lots of beautiful native bush on it, and almost no services, we have current rates of, the rate increase will be $107 next year, which is a 35% increase. So I have looked at the numbers, and I do agree, for me personally, I can and will pay my rates because I do not intend to be a defaulter. If they go up by that much, I will pay them. And I'm in the fortunate position that I can find, in this case, an extra $170. But I do consider the position of my neighbour down the road, who indeed is known well to one of your councillors as a member of the traditional Blythe Valley Murray family. She's 86, and I just don't know that she will necessarily have that much spare income because I know she manage every penny. So it's for those who are already struggling with fixed incomes, for whom I speak most loudly. And I think that you need to consider either a way to help them or potentially find a different calculation method, which is transparent and seen to be fair, particularly from the perspective of those in the rural community.
Nicki, thank you for that. We're out of time. Thank you for all the work that you put in here. You understand your dollars and your percentages, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would please request that you provide to the councillors and also to me the information as to what is the range of the rates increase. I'm sure your modelling will have covered that, but I would be very interested to understand what that actually means. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, councillors, we have no submission in front of us for the next 15 minutes, so we will be adjourned until... I beg your pardon? I beg your pardon? You're saying? Those people are coming to observe the process, my understanding.
Yes. Thank you, Peter. You did a good job.
So can I get back to what I was saying?
Yeah.
So we'll be adjourned until 10:45. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. We're going to start the morning session just a little bit early. And I see online we have Councillor Farm, who's seeing online next door. And we also have Nicki Murray, previous speaker. And Nicki, you're welcome to stay online, listen if you wish. My name's Grant Edge. I'm just chairing this morning session. And so, look, we'll start with Bill and James Thomas. If you could come to the table. And we're looking at submission 478.
Good morning.
When you're ready to talk, you've got 10 minutes. A bell will ring at 9 minutes, and then we'll probably take some questions after that. So, and just turn your button on when you're ready to speak. So away you go.
Well, good morning. Thank you. The benefit of bringing the younger generation with me is that he's told me I haven't done my presentation very well, but I have printed it out. So I'm just going to pass them around. Is that all right? Everyone just take a copy?
That's fine. Thank you.
So all mistakes are mine. Is that right, John?
Thank you for clarifying.
So when that's working all right when the red light's on? Yeah, okay. So you don't really need to read the presentation now because we're going to briefly take you through it. But first of all, I thank you all for the opportunity to come and present a submission to your draft long-term plan. My son James and myself farm a family farm called Long Beach, and we have a subsidiary, Long Beach Dairies. Like everyone, it's with great concern that we read of the proposed 24% rate increase and the accuracy of how that rate increase calculation is presented to the public. When we look at our current annual rate to the Regional Council, the number is $29,000. A 24% increase brings that to $36,000, an increase of $7,000. However, when we use the rate calculator on the ECAM website, that increase is a whopping 47% increase, which is $43,000, which is an increase of $13,000 for the option 2 and $41,000 for option 1. So the consulting document is misleading when it's publicised everywhere that's a 24 increase when it's a larger increase for properties in the Hinds area. It shows an average increase for the Ashburn properties, but not significantly or specifically for Hinds. And I thought this is a pretty poor communication strategy. It would have been better to come out at the start and say that, you know, certain areas are higher than other areas. ECAN has set up a cost-plus structure while not increasing or addressing their own operational costs. For example, any consent, which there are numerous numbers of them on the farm, are monitored, and consents are monitored, reported and reviewed. All the farm costs to make that happen are borne by the farmer. All ECAN costs when they look after associated with that consent are also paid by the farmer. So the monitoring of consents is cost neutral for ECAN, but there are significant costs to the farm, and yet we face what appears to be a 47% increase in rates. What's that for? It's certainly not for anything ECAN is involved with on the farm because we're paying for that already. We're told to target New Zealand farming is to target high value production. But where's the value add from ECAN? The large rate increase significantly impacts our ability to employ any additional staff. This impact will be experienced by many properties of a similar size in the Hinds catchment. In real terms, the increase of $13,000 spent, an increase in rates, could have been spent on employment. It will be the equivalent to employing a casual person on the farm for up to 691 hours. And 691 hours, excuse me, because that's a wee couple of pictures of your rate calculator there for accuracy. $691 hours of work at $20 an hour, which is roughly 86 days work plus holiday entitlement, KiwiSaver, and sick days. Now the employment opportunity is lost as that money has gone into rates increase, instead work that will now not be available for someone, and that someone probably being a student, a beneficiary, semi-retired person or a solo parent who cannot work full time. This is incredibly concerning for the entire Ashburn district as agriculture is the main employer. ECAN has successfully taken away this opportunity from people who need it the most. Sharing costs on environmental goals, that is what should be happening in my mind. This term of councillors has got it wrong. Firstly, by blatantly targeting one group of the community, which is farmers. The majority of farmers have made a huge inroad into improving the environment we all live in. The examples are limiting nitrogen fertilisers, which we now use, and large areas of native plantings, decreasing stock numbers, fencing waterways, and all the other farming practices that you see here now. And these are driven by the Canterbury Water Management Strategy and ECAN itself. So what you've done there has been good and it's working. We're all environmentalists at heart, but do have different views on the rate of change and how we can mitigate the economic impact on that change. There's a growing list of environmental compliance regulations being placed on farms that increase costs significantly. 44% plus increase in rates helps no farmer, just means there's less to spend on what really matters, our environment. Urban Christchurch residents, are they happy with the nitrate levels in their Christchurch water at 6 to 11 milligrams per litre, that nothing needs to be spent on them improving it? Very few urban waterways would have a nitrate reading of 2.7, which in fact our farm well does have. Our rates are increasing to 44, while city ratepayers are only paying 3% rate increase. The cost of meeting new environmental regulations should be shared amongst all the community, not targeted at a specific group. The uniform annual general charge should be utilised to the maximum 30%, which is allowed under the Government Act. In order to share this cost burden, it is unfair to charge based on capital value of properties alone. So that's basically my outline, and then we talk about the future. And there he is.
Tēnā koutou, my name's James Thomas. So we're generational farmers. We've been on the land for 157 years. We've grown food on that same bit of land over that time. Dad's the 5th generation, I'm the 6th, and my children are the 7th. But they have the opportunity to farm and produce food as we have. Over the generations, we've farmed livestock, sheep, beef, cattle. We grow crops that include wheat and barley, small seeds, vegetables, and lately hemp. We run function and farm garden tours, a function centre, and farm and garden tours. We have fenced waterways, planted native and exotic trees. We have over 8 various ECAN consents, all compliant. Farm environment plans, which recently received an A audit on both farms. Our well, as Bill said, which supplies water to the vast majority of the homes, measures a nitrate number of 2.7 parts per million. The water is tested monthly with no coliforms or E. coli bacteria present. The estate and dairy employs 11 to 13 people and has all the responsibility and compliance that goes with being an employer. We care for our land, our waterways, because they are the lifeblood of our business. And our reward for all this, to increase our rates by over 40%. If rules become impractical to manage and fixed costs from regional and district councils are burden too big to bear, well, we could always convert to forestry. 1,000 hectares of land, give or take. We take all the capital improvements away, plant pine trees, the rates would significantly decrease, and based on the current carbon price of $38 a tonne, the return would roughly be about $1.3 million a year. 11 people would lose their jobs. The consequence of farms like ours converting to forestry over time would be huge. Large areas of quality pastoral land being sold to carbon funds to plant pine trees for the benefit of largely large polluters. Erosion of rural communities, schools and sports clubs closing down, local businesses, garage, motel, chemist, supermarket becoming economic, ceasing to exist. Flow-on effects of business spending from rural people would flow on into towns. Food production falls and less land available to produce food, causing prices to increase and potentially cheap, low-quality imported food coming into the country from overseas. I know this may all sound very extreme, but it's already starting to happen in parts of New Zealand on unproductive land. And you can see that, for the landowner, there's still a relatively good return. We fully support MAR. However, we urge the Council to consider an alternative way to rate this activity. Perhaps a targeted uniform annual charge on all rural properties in Canterbury would be a fairer approach. This could be achieved by using a differential to rate all farming properties equally. There is no greater benefit to higher capital value properties from MAR, as you have been able to justify this in the funding approach in your long-term plan. The proposed rate increase lumps the responsibility for the environment on the minority of ratepayers. Wouldn't it be fairer if we all shared this cost through a uniform charge? The rural community already contribute the majority of the rates received by ECAN. I'll leave you with one final question. Can you name an urban property facing a 47% rate increase? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take some questions. Councillors, if there are any questions. Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you for your submission. Can you give me a breakdown of the difference between, I guess, the general rate and the targeted rates that are being applied to your property and the properties in the Hines area?
I actually haven't got that information here.
You've got the breakdown.
All I've got is the breakdown of the increase from the calculator. I haven't got the rate.
Isn't it?
No, that's just a change.
So we've got general rate and targeted rate.
Oh, yeah. Yes, if we look at that diagram that came with the papers, you can see the targeted rate is in orange and the general rate is in blue.
Thank you. Councillor Pauling?
Yeah, I was going to touch on that too. I think it's about $9,000 from looking at your property. $9,000 in targeted rates rise, and then about 3,000-ish in general rate rise, from what I can see on the rate calculator. So thanks for supplying that for us. It's really helpful. Just picking up on your comment there about MAR, and you put forward there about a uniform annual charge across all rural properties. Can you just tell us a little bit more about why you did that?
My understanding of MAR is to reduce the nitrates in the waterways and in the groundwater which from the bores. That benefits everyone living in the rural areas. It doesn't just benefit the landowner. We all want safe water to drink. So anyone living in the area benefits equally in my mind, because in our area we're right down the bottom of the food chain. We haven't caused any of these problems. We're right on the coast on very heavy land, but we're happy to pay our bit. We just don't think we should be paying the lion's share.
Great, thank you. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you. Mine's an add-on to that, just for clarity. Are you just looking for, I can see from your submission, that you're looking for the split to be the same for all areas rather than the 3 zones it's currently separate pricing on, or proposed to be separate? So are we just talking about
Yeah, we're just talking about our area because we understand that it's benefiting our area at the moment. Obviously, it's a pilot scheme that could really benefit the rest of the country in time. So, but I believe the central government is paying some towards it already. But
Thank you. Thanks, Bill and James, for presenting today. Have we got time for one more question? Yes. Sorry, we do have time for one more question. Councillor Hans, you had your hand up.
Thanks, James and Bill. In your first comment on your submission from the website, you've talked about is there anything we could cut, or what do you think we should remove to bring the rates down? You've talked about MAR already. Can you be able to expand on things you think we should remove, or other comments in that space at all?
Well, as general, as in any business, which we're all in various ways, operational costs are, quite considerable, and I just feel that ECAN should probably be looking more at their operational costs and try and make the budget work on both ways, because in a normal business situation, when the income and the expenses don't match, you have to do something about the expenses and try and get the income up, and you can't just lift the income and leave the expenses the same, especially when you're doing a statutory rate increase. So I think it's across the board, nothing specific, just across the board on how those costs sit.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming all this way for your presentation today. We have our next submitter is submitter 1211, Frank Hill. Thank you, Frank. You have 10 minutes and the bell will ring at 9 minutes. And when you're ready to go, just press your button on the right-hand side there.
Kia ora, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity for submitting today. I'm not sure if it's deliberate that I'm following Mr. Thomas's excellent presentation, but you can see from my submission that we're obviously a fair way apart. I'm here today just as a Christchurch resident, obviously an urban ratepayer, and really just, you can probably see that there's a significant amount of differences between urban and rural things, which is really a real shame. It's quite disappointing. But anyway, I've just a couple of points I want to talk about, and Ma was certainly one on my list as well. The one proposed for the other side of the river over in the Waikirikiri district. I don't, as far as I can see, I believe these things are just a trial, and I'm not sure that they're going to be of any benefit to the community overall. In fact, I think there's a danger to the Christchurch water supply in terms of E. coli being put into the groundwater. I don't think that risk is worthwhile. Christchurch, we want to maintain our pristine water, and so experimenting with that sort of scheme over on that side of the river is not really appropriate in my view. So that's what I'd just like to say in terms of those. The other point I was going to make was in relation to the planning process in terms of, I believe you're going to review the land and water, overall land and water regional plan. You want to go back and do that based on what the government have indicated in terms of the latest national policy statement. I'd suggest probably farmers have had enough of the planning process. I know, having followed Plan Change 7 reasonably closely, it's rather cumbersome and quite draining, and there's a lot to follow up. So Christchurch, West Melton was the next. We did plan to review the Christchurch zone next, was in 2022, starting with that. I reckon that the Christchurch ratepayers should have that opportunity, as you've indicated you would do. We should be the next group to set our planning limits so that we can make sure that our water supply is protected. I appreciate that you've got government obligations here, but as I say, I think farmers have got enough to do trying to comply with Plan Change 5 and 7, etc. They probably need a break from all that, but it's for them to comment, no doubt. Obviously, my opinion of the Christchurch water management strategy is completely different in the previous matter. It's been an absolute failure in terms of what urban ratepayers are feeling. The intensification that's been allowed has just created a whole mire of issues and problems, and the collaborative process has failed. There hasn't been any collaborative process. There's a couple of groups that have been involved, but the rest of the community's been effectively shut out. That's certainly how urban ratepayers feel about it. We're not being listened to. We're drinking chlorinated water. We've got nitrates coming into our water supply, and we've got foreign water bottling companies taking our water. So, we're not feeling any of the love, I suppose, or any benefits of that proposed strategy. In fact, there's no benefits as far as I see it. So, the zone committees, again, they really have failed us. I've talked to a couple of councillors recently about Addington Brook, which flows through the city and is still a mess. There's been 10 years, that zone committee's had over 10 years to clean up one little stream going through the city, and it still looks like a weed-infested bog. It's appalling. So I just don't see why there's a need to continue with that strategy when it's not meeting the needs of the urban communities. So that's really the sort of three main points I wanted to make. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Frank. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Southwood.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I was interested in your comments. You talk about the Christchurch Canterbury Water Management Strategy was supposed to have been funded by a levy, but wasn't. Can you elaborate a bit on that, please?
Yeah, so the funding wasn't specifically addressed in the Canterbury Water Strategy as I see, but there was mention of a levy. So, you know, I don't know what I can't quote the overall numbers, but what was it, $35 million roughly for the thing? The last time that you actually published the figures, we're talking about, you know, in terms of what urban ratepayers were contributing, it was approximately $20 to $22 million. Again, I'm not entirely sure, but you know, just, you know, we seem to be bearing the burden of the overall cost, and I'm not sure why that. As I say, we're not getting any benefit from it, so why are we paying for it?
Thank you, Councillor Suckle.
Thank you for your submission. Just a question on public transport. You've made a differentiation between taxpayers and ratepayers. I mean, I put a challenge out there for a conversation. Just your view on the difference between taxpayers and ratepayers?
Yes, well, I think I've said there. Look, to be fair, I'd have to say, Councillor, that when I first heard that, I thought, you know, I certainly rolled my eyes. But funny enough, my younger daughter said to me, well, the noted that a lot of university students don't take the bus because they can't afford it, and it's inconvenient, it doesn't go where they want, and, you know, and I was sort of thinking, well, and a lot of them don't drive, they're exactly the people who should be using public transport. So, yeah, look, I think, you know, it's worth having the debate about. I think there was talk about a $2 flat fee. I think that's probably a more reasonable ground, but, you know, there'll be a lot of ratepayers that don't actually take the buses. I'm guilty, certainly one of them, but so, you know, I think obviously you're going to have to then get the government to chip in, and that's going to be probably a more difficult task, but, you know, if you make all the bus services free, is it roughly $20 or $25 million you're going to add on to the ratepayer bill? Is somewhere in that vicinity on top of the 47 or 24% increase or something. So, you know, really the numbers are just getting out of control, aren't they?
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Councillor, put your hand up. Yes, I did, yeah. But I thought there were a few people ahead of me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your submission, Frank. I was interested in your comments about the Addington Brook. Are you working yourself to help restore that creek?
No, I'm not, but I have attended a number of zone committee meetings previously, and I have highlighted it to them that, and I have attended previous cleanups that have been organised, but look, you know, it's, you know, we were encouraged to get involved in the process, and so I got involved, but there's nothing really happening from what I see. You know, that creek's been, I know it's a little small creek, but at the end of the day, it runs through Hagley Park, past netball courts, past the cricket grounds, and, you know, it's not a good look for the city, as many of our waterways aren't, but, you know, the council here is obviously responsible. I understand the council thing, but this is your project that you guys have said that we're going to look after this creek. So you guys need, you know, you're taking $20 million a year out of us. I think last time I talked to you, had 0.4 of a staff member allocated to do some work on that little creek. So, you know, and it's still not got anywhere. It's, you know, it's pretty disappointing.
Right, Councillor Farm, final question.
Yeah, thanks for your submission, Frank. I wanted to ask a question about specifically your request to prioritise Christchurch in terms of planning. Just for some context for the question though, the reason that we're sort of trying to do this delay in planning now is so that we can align our coastal environment plan, our land and water plan, and our regional policy statement as one, and instead of sort of this ongoing siloed approach. With that in mind, would you prefer that we did still prioritise Christchurch as its own thing, or are you interested in exploring a more integrated approach to planning where we're looking from the mountains to see that kind of thing? Sorry, you're button, Frank.
Sorry. Look, okay, that seems reasonable. I hear what you're saying, but I do think, you know, we've had 10 years of various planning regimes, and, you know, the people in the city are not happy about things in terms of water bowlers and everything else. And, you know, I think that they need to have the opportunity to have their say, and it's time that you spend some time trying to listen to what they want and achieve some of those outcomes, you know, because they're not feeling the love, so to speak.
Thank you, Frank. I think you've had more questions than anybody for a wee while to answer, so thank you very much for great work in answering those questions. That's okay, thank you. Our next submitter is submitter 978, Sofia Silva, or Silva, sorry. You have 10 minutes and the bell will ring at 9 minutes, and just press your button when you're ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Your long-term plan says the future of Canterbury's environment is in our hands. I happen to believe that each of us play an integral part in Canterbury's environmental fate, and that our individual actions cannot be underestimated. However, as a loving citizen, I witness that most, if not all, high-impact decisions are out of our community's hands and side with corporate interests, violating time and time again not only our trust, but the ecosystems you exist to protect. Policies and law are designed to let a small number of corporations, most of them transnational, exploit natural resources to the brink of collapse, while obscene amounts of money flow into shareholders' pockets with pretty much zero liability, including tax avoidance strategies meanwhile, they continue to leave behind a trail of social, economic, and environmental destruction. In the meantime, the cleanup job is left to the people, not just with our tax and rates dollars, which are a product of our hard work, but perhaps the biggest price of all, our overall joy, well-being, our livelihoods, our sense of connection, and our hope in a future worth living. You say, together we aim to enhance our quality of life while improving environmental sustainability, balancing the cultural, social, economic, and environmental well-beings for the region. I want to challenge this idea that it should be a balancing act. The environmental chaos we're contending with is a direct result of this skewed view that economic growth can only come at the expense of the environment, and that it's a necessary evil in the name of progress. This is simply not true. These ideas are rooted in economic doctrines created and propagated by the few who profit and get to dominate from them. And in fact, true economic well-being is not possible without prioritizing people and the environment we live in. And there are many examples across all industries that demonstrate that this is not only possible, but the only way forward. This is not a balancing act, it's a rescue mission, and the scientific community largely agree, after years of corporate sponsorship of climate change denial, that we only have a few years to get this right. It's no coincidence that our communities are experiencing alarming levels of mental health dis-ease, starting with our younger generations. They too see what's going on, and it's a big burden to carry collectively. There's a centuries-long sense of betrayal and bitterness towards our governing institutions, poisoning our communities, and we need to move forward with resolve and restore trust. I have no doubt each of you mean well, and you're trying to do the right thing, otherwise you wouldn't have chosen this job. But it feels like you've forgotten that the policies and procedures you're bound by are made to be broken or changed if it means standing up for what matters. This is a call for your bold, passionate, personal leadership to rebuild trust with our community and do what's right by our people, and go beyond the web of financial interests that pressure your organization day in and day out. Every day you have the opportunity to stand up for Canterburyans, and you do in a lot of ways, but in a way that us common citizens don't. Your daily actions and decisions have the potential to effect change much faster than we can individually. Our local communities need their power back, and true democracy and the sovereignty of our natural resources return. Now, there are some specific points I'd like to get across, and I'll try to be really quick. Number one, the design of ECAM's long-term plan and ongoing participation in decisions affecting our resources feels exclusive and cumbersome. Our local democracy needs to be strengthened so the population have direct influence over key decisions. Our democratic processes are not accessible nor designed to encourage participation. It's quite the opposite. The vast majority of the population won't have the knowledge to understand the full implications of plans, decisions, and policies, and this information needs to be made more clear and accessible. Most of us are also not clear on how policies get created and how we can lobby for changes effectively in our communities. Corporates have entire legal teams and manpower to exert their influence because the system has been designed to cater for their needs. And we need to rectify this to make sure communities get equity in the process. So I propose the creation of a project to explain our local democratic processes to people so we know how decisions are made, as well as the different ways we can participate beyond our votes in seasonal elections, with the goal of creating ongoing engagement from the public and the creation of a true partnership between ECAN and our people, because better things will result from that. Number 2, on Te Mana o Te Wai and water security. Our current trajectory globally is putting our water under threat, not only locally through the result of our current practices and the systems that enable them, but as different countries head further along the path of ecologic havoc, it makes New Zealand water the ideal target for corporate exploitation. The calamitous state of New Zealand's waterways is no secret and demands our urgent attention. However, we're acting like we have all the time in the world to continue with business as usual. There are several areas missed in the plan that I either misunderstand or are not present that need to be addressed and rectified before it's too late. While large portions of our population deal with contaminated drinking water and entire regions deal with droughts, there are gaps in law and policy that allow any water bottling company to take billions of liters every day of pristine water for no proven economic gain. Even if these companies claim they're creating jobs, the dollar figures don't add up to justify the approval of these consents. So how can we continue to approve consents of this kind, given they're a direct violation of the mission we are tasked with? I request the LTP includes the actions needed to amend or lobby for the amendment of the laws and policies that allow the exploitation of our water for profit, and that these be fully disclosed to the public. Number 3, on the recent consent approved without public notification by ECAN to allow MHV Water Cooperative to irrigate 56,000 hectares of private farmland for the next 10 years and dump alarming levels of nitrates into the soil. I have a genuine question for you. How is this decision in line with Te Mana o Te Wai? The needs of the river come first. I understand our farmers need this consent to continue to grow food, but where is MHV being held accountable for their impact in the process beyond collecting money from farmers and at the same time putting pressure on these same farmers they collect profits from? Farmers are the custodians of our land and sustenance, yet they find themselves in the same predicament as the rest of us do. About 80 years ago, IG Farber, the corporation that sold chemical weapons and nerve gases to Hitler, backed by venture capitalists, rebranded those same poisons into agri-chemicals to profit from agriculture. Like any corporation, over time, they exerted their power and influence over government policy and industry practices to ensure maximum profit and minimum liability. Fast forward a few years, and the use of these poisons became just the way we farm and grow food. Here we are dealing with the ecological collapse of our soil and our water and our land, all through lack of regulation and in a way that it penetrated farming practices today, pretty much without farmers' consents. We want farming to be done by our farmers, not corporations, so we need to support their transition into better systems. Our farmers are caught in the middle of corporate exploitation on different fronts, by the chemical companies, by the financial institutions that require the use of pesticides to facilitate lending, tech companies which collect data from farmers and resell it to them for profit, and irrigation schemes. All of these parties collect the profits and leave the farmers to clean up the consequences. Now, I'm not excusing farmers from the changes they clearly need to make. The changes into regenerative agriculture are proven to be for the better in all aspects of farming, including better profits. And I understand most farmers are leaning towards them anyway. But how are we letting these other parties, including MHV Water in this specific consent, pollute without any financial penalties or overall revoking of consents should they fail to reduce the nitrate levels dumped into the soil? This is the revenue line missing in the LTP, the one that sanctions polluters with the intent of prohibiting these practices altogether quickly so we can use those funds to rebuild and repair our local ecosystems. I'm an optimist and a woman of action, and I'm here to stand for my children's future, but also for the future of our beautiful New Zealand. It's not knowledge we're missing. It's the courage to keep taking action daily and break apart a system of which you are a part of that keeps failing us all year after year. It's time to create something new that honors our region and our people. And I call on your courage and power to drive the radical transformation we so desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. We're just a couple of two questions. Councillor McKenzie and Councillor Scott.
I wonder if I could just ask Sophia, as a matter of process, your submission's a lot different from what we received. Could you leave it with us?
Sure. It has more detail.
So I've got a question around consents. So I'm not sure if you're aware of the process, but at the moment, Council doesn't make decisions on consents. We appoint independent commissioners to do that. So would you see us as having a more active role in considering consents or reviewing the process? Or, I mean, what do you think ideally we should do around this?
I think there's two parts. Sorry, I think there's two parts to this. First, the public need to be informed on the transparency of the consent process. And the public needs to be given the opportunity to have a say throughout that process. And I understand in some consents we do, in some we don't. Now, in terms of appointing independent commissioners, so long as they're not affiliated with any interests related to the consent. But I think also there needs to be more power along the process allocated to different parties so that the last commissioner has the full say in what happens. It needs to be a result of everyone's will. And it feels most of the time it is against the will of the people.
Thank you, Sophia. We won't take any more. We won't take any more questions. Thank you very much for your statement and submission. And very passionate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next submitter is submission 1172, Linda Pocock. Linda, if you could take the table. And when you're ready to go, Linda, if you could press the button on the right-hand side, that would be much appreciated. You have 10 minutes and a bell will ring at 9 minutes.
Starting from now. Okay, all I can say is thank you so much for that very impassioned but true to the heart submission. I entirely endorse it. I have also tabled 2 additional documents in support of my ideas, which I hope you've got, using glyphosate around trees from the Tree Croppers Association, and Honeymoon Latte, which is a really interesting book, Kai Culture, Food and Stories from Aotearoa. But it most particularly identifies the awareness of dairy impact. And it was the most innovative way of presenting it, as certainly I know Lan Fan was instrumental in it, since I saw a picture of her in a bath of milk. My concerns are soil health, synergism of the toxins that we're dealing with, river flow, and in agreement with our previous speaker, democracy. It's well established now that our environment has been severely affected by the intensive farming techniques that we've been dealing with. But with without calling for blame, where you can, I believe ECAN must be actually supporting farmers who need to transition. You will know the value of self-motivation for empowerment and groups like Quorum Sense. Maybe you've come across them. They are now funded by MPI, and they offer mutual support in both motivating and directing effective change. There are, and the change would be towards regenerative farming. There are, for instance, grants available under the Billion Trees situation. But when I inquired as to whether or not farmers could use this to create shelter belts for their animals, whereby they could comply with the Animal Welfare Act and provide shelter, which they don't at the moment, I was told, well, you can't plant trees under irrigator, but you can plant the giant flax. And the giant flax would give you that additional shelter and all the biodiversity that goes with a hedge line. And yet the rules were such that farmers couldn't plant flax under the grant system because flax isn't a tree. It just requires redesignating it as a tree. I think there is also a big issue on actually understanding what farmers are allowed to do. I was speaking to a farmer and they said, oh, this whole business of leaving a paddock fallow is rubbish. You're going to get the wind blowing the topsoil off. You can't leave a ploughed field. No, that's not what leaving a paddock fallow means. They didn't understand, maybe it's the old Anglo-Saxon in me, but leaving a paddock fallow doesn't mean ploughing it up and leaving it. It means leaving it with the roots in place, with the microorganisms in place. There was even a lecturer from our U3A group from Lincoln University, and she quoted a farmer and she said, this farmer was really dismayed because he couldn't understand why the regenerative process of using the winter feed with the sunflowers, the kale and the mixed pasture, you know, all you're left with is stalks. Well, what are you left with when you feed kale? But at least with the regenerative seed mixture, you've got a much better chance of enriching the soil, enriching the animals with a more varied diet. There is a lack of understanding about what so much of this involves. And if the vital micro and macrobiota of our soil is to recover, there must be a move away from artificial herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers. That's where the Tree Croppers Guide comes in, and it does demonstrate quite clearly the effect of the glyphosate on the number of microorganisms in the soil. The whole issue of the effect on the health of operatives using weed killer is no longer in dispute. Our customers abroad know this. Japan recently rejected honey that was contaminated with glyphosate. Changing to regenerative farming techniques will be hard because staffing levels are so much more tight now on a farm, and it does require a lot more attention. So why not fund initiatives that would gradually allow farmers to see the benefits, a paddock at a time? And I think this again is one of the reasons why farmers are so worried about the whole pressure, because they imagine they've got to go boom straight into it. But do it a paddock at a time. Then I'd like to look at water and soil health, because they are so much hand in glove. We rightly emphasize the risk of nitrates now with the links to human and stock health. It's no longer in dispute. What we are missing is the combined effect, synergism of all the rubbish in our soil. We have to deal with this in New Zealand with young soils. New Zealand soils haven't had the benefit of millions of years of herbivores peeing and pooping on the land and allowing a biota in the soil to develop that will support that addition. Then we've got the issue of these young soils having to deal with the grazing residues, I think they're called. The soils are so patchy. In Oxford, you only have to move a couple of kilometres up the road and you move from heavy clay onto gravel. The way that the contaminants move through these soils, I'm sure you will know, is very variable. You hit the colloidal soils, the colloid acts like a jelly. It absorbs the pollutants. If you're on gravels, it drops straight through into the underground rivers and into the aquifers. And once it's in the soil, the movement through water from up in my area coming down to Christchurch, it's moving through the soil. The soil acts like a chromatogram. Do you remember how it, from your school days, you probably looked at plant pigments, how they accumulated in layers? This is what is happening in the soil. You'll get bands of contamination because of that movement through. My own investigations some years back with the Water Research Council in Britain involved the toxic effect of copper and zinc on the cyanophytes in reservoir water. But what we discovered was that you could considerably enhance the effect of those toxins by using them in lower than the normal toxic dose if you combine them together. So this was the element of synergy, and synergy doesn't just work with my copper and zinc, it works with all manner of different chemicals that are going to affect the life of microorganisms and ultimately us. I'm suggesting ECAN should really seriously look at testing for a much wider range of pollutants. We've got a whole load of old car dumps, old PCBs dumping out of the engines, arsenic from old sheep dips, dioxins, pesticides, herbicides, fire retardants. Then we've got heavy metals like cadmium coming from the superphosphate applications. And even low doses of glyphosate will be affecting these very vulnerable microorganisms. And as the previous speaker explained, glyphosate was one of those chemicals that was originally developed in the post-war years. It was developed as a soil sterilant in much lower doses than we need to kill off the plants. And it is residual in soil, especially in clay soils. As another, just as a by the way, I really feel that no consent should be given in low-lying areas like Pegasus Bay, because it then brings me to the whole issue of what is happening on the coastline, down our braided rivers. Currently, the braided rivers are a mess. They're a strangled mess of weeds, and it's going to take years to restore. We had a wonderful example last year, was it, when we had a fire along the Ashley? It did a great job of clearing out the weeds. You can't do fires to clear weeds because they tend to spread a bit. But again, a farmer friend of mine told me that there is no longer a river rating whereby the farms alongside the rivers were responsible for clearing those banks. And she's told me that from the Hapū up in our area, farmers were no longer required to do this. Is it possible to reinstate river rating? Herbicide treatment of these areas is not a good option. It results in a mass clear out of your aquatic weeds and of the animal life that our birds that we so celebrate are dependent on. It creates masses of dead vegetation that rot in the water, which actually, one, they're a fire risk, and two, they're also, they're also a great seedbed for the rest of the ongoing weed regeneration. Climate change is here, it's unpredictable. Stock animals are a prime contributor, and yet there is apparently no measures in place to promote the growing trend to create meat-free meat or cow-free milk. Here is where your communications department could be effective. I think, the last thing I really need to say is that democracy should be at the root of all your decisions. You are representative of us, the ratepayer. and on no account should the recharge scheme be in place to enable further irrigation. The previous speaker mentioned the MHV scheme, and I just hope that in that area, no one is planning to use good river water from one area to pay Peter to disparage from Paul, that you are simply robbing the rivers of the flow. You have no idea in taking that flow, especially in drought situation, what is the consequence of that lower down the river. Most of our rivers in my area are now dry. And I do suggest that although I ask a lot of you, you must be clearly demonstrating you are not wasteful of our money. You are making public the monitoring and evaluation of the public, of the progress you make and any trials that are underway. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. We're running a wee bit behind time, so we won't take any questions, but thank you very much for another impassioned plea. Thank you. Do we have Sonia? Do we have Sonia Spencer? No? In which case we'll take submitter 1256, the Francine bills. Is Francine here? Thanks, Francine.
My submission concerns the pollution of the Selwyn River at Glen Tunnel, which is inland from Darfield and very close to the headwaters of the Selwyn. Stewardship of our water and land is a collective responsibility. At the Joyce Reserve, on the bank of the Waikirikiri Selwyn River, Glen Tunnel school students celebrated the planting of their 100,000th native seedling in September 2020. The reserve is a Glen Tunnel landmark on the greenway from the mountains to the sea that Te Ara Kakariki Trust is creating. These trees acknowledge what we are today, said MP Eugenie Sage. What we're restoring, helping Papa Tuanuku, Mother Earth, to thrive so that we can be healthy as well. She means that for us to be healthy, we need the water and the land to be healthy. We are the people, the land and the water. Ko Waikirikiri te awa. Just over the road that leads down to the Selwyn, my family is celebrating almost 70 years at 5 Whitecliffs Road. Our next door neighbours are celebrating 140 years of living by the Selwyn, first at Whitecliffs and now at Glen Tunnel. We have all taken responsibility for the river and the land and have been doing our bit for years. We work hard to keep the banks weed-free. We plant hundreds of native plants and trees. We maintain and plant the piece of land at the junction of Whitecliffs Road and Inland Scenic Route 72, even though we don't own it. We have invested in our properties, new buildings and renovations that are environmentally responsible. The plan supports intergenerational projects, and you could certainly apply that word, intergenerational, to ours. No, that's not the one I want. There's one before that. That one should come through. Have you stopped the clock? Building community support. plan's aim is to build community support, but community support is already built at Glentunnel. The community provides voluntary work and care and takes pride in the environment. This photo is near the start of the river walk on the north bank of the Selwyn from Route 72 to the holiday park and domain. You can see the recent plantings. The walk meanders through the trees and long grasses and through some ferny patches. But every now and then, in fact about 7 times, the walk leads you to a stony beach and the water. As well as the river walk, there's the Colgate Millennium Walkway right through to Route 72. The always attractive holiday park, domain, children's playground and golf club, even the mountain bike track, which is offered to the community by Glentunnel School. Further along the river walk, you arrive at the holiday park swimming hole. But now turn and walk towards the camera. Go round the corner, and this is what you see. The water. It should be the biggest draw card, but the sign is a permanent warning. Generations of our families have been drawn to the water, but it's not the same now the river is destroyed. Our parents fished for trout and we fished for cockabullies and tadpoles, but one day the slime and algae had taken over and we never fished again. We learnt water safety paddling in the shallows. From a young age, we could identify which parts of the river were safe to cross because they were wider and shallower. That didn't stop us taking on the deeper parts just for fun. But at some stage, the river became polluted, and the pollution made the rocks too slippery, and falling down was no longer safe. Nothing would stop our daughter enjoying the calming effects of the water until the day I told her she needed to stop putting her head under. To quote her, "The cows wading through the river upstream and the dead sheep in the shallows were a worrying sign that people were not looking after our beautiful river. We were extra careful not to swallow, and eventually we were not allowed to put our ears under. We started seeing mats of brown sludge in the water and covering the rocks. The diggers were digging out swimming holes less, and we started spending less time in the river. Now we very rarely go down to the water. Going to Glentunnel is not what it used to be. We visit the park and play at the school. If we swim in the school's chlorinated pool." Our neighbour writes, "It has saddened us immensely to see the deterioration in the quality of this once beautiful river and surrounds. We are so disappointed that we can't now share with our granddaughter those wonderful opportunities that we had. 15 minutes in a small plastic pool doesn't begin to compare with an afternoon of fun and laughter on the banks of a real, clean, swimmable river." Our daughter continues, "My children are 11, 7 and 5 years old. They are all water babies like I was. We take them to weekly swimming lessons to make sure they can be safe in the water. My oldest is such a good swimmer, he competed in the Canterbury Zone swimming sports. None of them has ever swum in the river. We barely let them go near it. If we do go near the water, we go to throw stones, and the whole time I worry about the splashes. We have a dog who has to sit back from the water on a short leash because I am terrified she will drink the water and die. My warning to the children that if they fall in they must not swallow the water does not even halfway express my fear of them falling in and getting the water on their skin, in their ears and in their eyes. The trek down to the water that my parents and grandparents tended leads only to disappointment and danger. The diggers are no longer sent to maintain the area and no swimming holes have been dug for years. The rowboat sits deflated in the corner. I'm ashamed of what the river has become, and I'm glad my grandparents are no longer around to see the state it is in. They would be horrified at the carelessness of the people tasked with caring for the river and saddened that only 2 generations later we are not able to use the river for leisure. We call ourselves the Waikirikiri Selwyn River Guardians, and since our submission our numbers have grown to 18 concerned members. But what of the other Glen Tunnel stakeholders, those businesses whose viability would depend on the river as the main drawcard? What is the economic cost to our community of not being able to offer a clean river? Yes, stewardship of our water and land is a collective responsibility, and support needs to be mutual. So what will you do about this? There are several contributing factors to the Selwyn's problems, many of which originate close to the headwaters just upstream of Glen Tunnel. What is happening at this tributary could be one of them. You might see the cattle more clearly here. Our submission is that ECAN shows its support in return. Don't turn your phrase collective responsibility into empty political spin. Address these factors by applying and enforcing a strong regulatory framework and restoring and repairing the environment so that we can be healthy as well. Please revive the Waikirikiri Selwyn River. Thank you.
Thank you, Francine. Are there any questions from councillors? No. Councillor Farm?
Thanks very much for your submission, Francine. Yeah, I think we're all just struggling a bit to find a question to something so personal, and thank you for bringing that. I guess my question would be, look, clearly you have this real connection to your river, and your family does. And what, unfortunately, in this current way that we operate in the world, comes down to money and expenditure. And so I guess I just want to get some commentary or invite some commentary from yourself if you support what we do have in our long-term plan in terms of, you've mentioned restoring the environment and more monitoring and compliance and enforcement. Can we interpret those comments as supporting the plan, or would you like us to go further? I'm just inviting some commentary on that if you want to give anything further. Just the right button.
Well, I noticed in the plan there was mention of the braided rivers, but I couldn't see any mention of this particular river. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on that, and I believe that all the members of our group would wish you to allocate rates to solving these issues. And you mentioned that our we have strong family ties to the river at Glen Tunnel. But remember, I also mentioned the fact that the whole community does a lot of work to support the environment, and that in your plan there is all talk about collective responsibility. Well, I don't know what else we can do as a community, but I do know what else ECAN could do.
Thank you, Francine. Won't take any more questions for that. We just want to catch up a wee bit of time. But thank you very much for your submission and your presentation as well. Much appreciated. Okay, thank you. I now call on Bruce Campbell, submitter 1248. Thank you, Bruce. You have 10 minutes and the bell will go at 9 minutes. And do you have any information other than your original submission? Okay. Thank you. We acknowledge that there's some tabled information as well. Yeah, please begin.
I am Bruce Campbell and I live at 542 Yildiz Road, where we operate a certified organic export apple orchard. So I was very interested to hear some of the previous submitters on soil. In 2005, we built a dwelling under the 50 dBA air noise boundary, and the house was designed accordingly. In 2008, our land was reclassified to come under the 55 dBA air noise boundary. This was without any consultation. The first point I want to make is there are no grounds whatsoever for a 50 dB noise boundary surrounding the airport. We have never over 15 years complained of aircraft coming and going. The New Zealand Standard 6805 refers to 55 dBA as the outer air noise boundary for New Zealand airports. The current 50 dBA boundary stretches from Rolleston in the south to Hapū in the north. It covers a massive area of land. Interestingly, the Christchurch Airport's noise expert agreed that the internal noise level in the proposed airport hotel be 50 dBA. Why then should there be restrictions on land under a 50 dBA contour? It makes no sense. There is no airport in any country that I can identify that has limitations under a 50 dBA contour. To place restrictions under a 50 dBA contour is an abuse of authority and a travesty of fairness. This could only happen where the ownership and the consenting authority are closely aligned. The data used in the October 2007 modelling agreement was known to most of the parties to be exaggerated by the Christchurch Airport, both the flight movements and also the forecast of aircraft types. It was accepted at the time as it was intended to revisit in 10 years. It was accepted at that time as it was intended to be revisited in 10 years. This can be confirmed by looking at the experts' agreement. Obviously, with the projected operation of the new airport at Tarras, there will be even fewer flight movements at Christchurch Airport. I pity the good folk of Tarras. They have no idea what they've got coming to them, especially when the Christchurch International Airport Limited get restrictions placed on the surrounding land. Did the shrinking of the 50 dBA boundary at Rolleston in 2008 have any effect on the operation of the Christchurch Airport? It did not. Did the people under the removed boundary have any noise problems? No, they have not. The 50 dBA air noise contour takes away a landowner's right to the free use of their land for no justifiable purpose. This was the abuse of power that the Magna Carta sought to remedy back in 1215, when freemen were not to be dispossessed of the use of their land. In fairness to all landowners, there needs to be a re-evaluation of the air noise boundaries. It was agreed back in 2007 there would be a re-evaluation in 10 years. That is now well past. I see from a Christchurch Airport noise website that they were going to submit new boundaries for consideration to ECAN in late 2020. I do not know if this has happened. Any new modelling of contours, including the input parameters, must be agreed to by independent qualified experts who have aeronautical acoustic qualifications and experience. Most probably there are no suitably qualified people domiciled in New Zealand. I request that ECAN finance and manage this process so there is an unbiased outcome The Christchurch Airport have the financial clout to have planners and legal experts working on future plans that independent landowners know nothing about until it is a fait accompli. The Christchurch Airport executive team have a very close and conflicted working relationship with the Christchurch City Council team. What the Christchurch Airport demand, they get. At every opportunity, Christchurch Airport tightens the screws, nibbling away at landowners' rights. For example, they now want to limit the ability to have a bed and breakfast facility under the air noise contours on property many kilometres away from the airport, and yet they have a hotel right at the airport where it is the noisiest. There are numerous issues that could be raised, but I'll keep my request simple. One is that there is no 50 dBA air noise contour. Therefore, there can be no land use restrictions under a 50 dBA contour. Two, that ECAN finance and manage the re-evaluation of the air noise contours out to the 50 dBA contour, and that it is chaired by an independent aeronautical acoustic expert. What I am requesting will have no impact whatsoever on the free operation of the Christchurch International Airport, but would redress a creeping unfairness sustained by the Christchurch International Airport Limited. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Just want any questions? Councillor Scott, Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bruce. There's a mention in your submission about the suggestion that the boundaries for consideration were going to be, they were on the website and that they were going to be passed to us in late 2020. Do you know if that is still there, that reference is still there?
Yes, I saw it the other day. Going through their meetings of the noise committee, they had worked through it, I think it was going back quite a few meetings, but the last, they were talking about it, but then the last one said they still hope to have it submitted by the last quarter of 2020.
My question is around, I just want to get some clarity around what does this mean in everyday terms, you know, the effect on you. I mean, I see there was something mentioned here about a bed and breakfast facility. How does it, what's an example of something that it limits you specifically?
I'm very happy where I am. I'm very happy where we are, where we are living, and I have no real problem. The main problem I have with the Christchurch International Airport is their on-ground noise, not their flight controls, and they have been creeping those as well. But the thing is, I think it does reduce the value of our land, the fact that there is these restrictions on it. When we built, I think I'm right in saying it was under the 50 dB area, but at that stage, there was no legal requirement where they could restrict anything. But that came in about 2008, I think it was. So it was really to do with the free use of the owed land that the Christchurch Airport seemed to be creeping on and on. And I do think there is a big area of land that is stopped being used for development that could well be for development of housing that the government is so much calling out for at the moment.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you very much for your submission today. We have heard other submissions about the airport noise issues, so thank you very much. Great. We have we now have submitter 1168, Joe Robertson and Ruth Sharr. Thanks, Joe and Ruth. When you're ready, if you just press the button on the right-hand part of the button, and it just begin when you're ready. You have 10 minutes, and the bell will go at 9. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. So I'm Joe Robertson, this is Ruth Sharr. We live in the Addington community, and we both have a role. We have a joint job share role as school community liaison for the Addington Te Kura Taumata. So we are representing a group of parents from Addington who are concerned about safety and community connectivity in Addington. and we want to address the transport and urban development section of the plan, particularly, and the air quality. So it's our view in Addington that the current way Greater Christchurch has been allowed to develop is unsustainable, and that it has led to problems in older inner suburbs like Addington, and Sydenham, Waltham will be similar. Particularly in our case, it's the new developments in the western suburbs, Prebbleton, Lincoln, Hallswell. What's happening there has big effects on our community, and so we want you to consider that in your planning. So the new developments out in the west are all designed to be accessed by car drivers, and the new southern motorway that's been built allows really smooth, easy transport for car drivers to go quickly and easily into the city, and then they hit us in Addington, and that makes our lives really difficult and complicated. So, and the same goes for trucks. So the trucks can get really easily and quickly in from Rolleston on the new southern motorway, and then they hit us in Addington, and we're trying to get our kids to school and get to work and go about our everyday lives, and we have this huge kind of funneling of cars right into the middle of our community. So yeah, so we think that ECAN has pretty much turned a blind eye to what's going on in terms of letting the greenfield developments happen and not really considering the effects on communities like ours. So,
kia ora. We both live in Addington. We live in a suburb that was recently recognised as one of the best places in New Zealand to live, and we completely agree. It's so interesting, diverse, vibrant, our neighbourhood. But we also want noted that one of the most difficult things about living in Addington is all of this traffic that comes right through us. Our suburb gets sort of cut into pieces by these roads, Brougham Street, Lincoln Road, and Morehouse Avenue as well. They cut off our families from our school. Half of our families live on one side of Brougham Street and have to cross Brougham Street to get to our local school. Every day our children have to cross over there. It's got such high traffic volumes, it feels dangerous and unpredictable. There are very few parents who allow their primary school children to walk by themselves over that road because it's so worrying, even if they're only a couple of 100 metres away. For 11 years, I've been walking my children to school over that road. There's been numerous times where trucks, cars fail to stop at the red light or creep over the crossing part. There was once when my son was little, he saw the green person, so he went and a truck didn't stop, and it was only because I'd grabbed him back that he would have been squashed flat. And I think probably everyone in Addington has examples of that happening.
My husband works across Lincoln Road. It's 200 metres from where we live. He works at Addington Coffee Co-op. So until very recently, my children are high school age now, but when they were primary school age, they could very easily walk to meet him from work and walk home with him, but they never would because you have to cross over Lincoln Road to do that. And they have stood on that crossing and stepped out and seen cars just go straight through the red light. So these places are real barriers for our everyday kind of walking and living and being part of our community.
Another example is our proximity to South Hagley Park. We're only, again, a couple of 100 metres away living there, but our kids don't go there by themselves. The Morehouse Avenue, that big intersection, Brougham Street, Morehouse Avenue, Lincoln Road, is just super dangerous for children. The cycleway is great, but even so, there's just risks every time you sort of take your life into your hands as you cross there. When you live in Addington, you live in a suburb that's cut off from itself, from the school, from the businesses, the parks, and it's just feels like it's a result of the urban planning that's prioritised the outer suburbs like Hallswell, those people, and just single-use vehicles just to get right through us, but no consideration has been given to our vulnerable people as well.
Thank you very much. I just wondered if there were any questions. Councillor Scott? Oh, you can carry on. Sorry, I thought you might have finished.
No, just wanted to say that currently the Waka Kotahi has plans to develop Byrnes Street, and particularly looking at congestion. And we don't know what that's going to look like, but we do know that what they will want is smooth flowing cars and fast cars going through that area. And for us, that means more danger for us and more severance for our community. So the cars going through will be the priority. And I know they've said to us that they want to remove pedestrians. We're just a hazard for the cars, and we're not people. So we really would like to see in the long-term plan just that you prioritise people using active transport. So that is good for everything. It's good for the world and the environment and the communities. So people biking and scooting and walking have priority over cars. We want the trucks off the local roads. So your plan mentions freight mode shift, and we would love to see that Rolleston inland port utilised and freight going on to rail. And so it's not just driving past our houses. We don't want those big trucks past our houses. And we think that building roads like that has just made it really easy for cars to come in, single-use cars, and that your plans for roads need to make it easy for high occupancy cars and express buses to go on those roads, and more difficult for single occupancy cars to go in. So anything that puts high occupancy vehicles first would be great for our community. And the other thing is that in your plan you stated that you wanted to take regional leadership in this area, and one of your values in taking regional leadership is manaakitanga, so people first. So I just want to put the question to you, which people are you putting first? Because it does make a difference, and communities like ours are really high in all kinds of social deprivation indices. We have a lot of really vulnerable people. So to me, regional leadership looks like equity for our vulnerable people. And that looks like when you say people first, that the people that you're putting first are the vulnerable people, so children, elderly, people with mental health and disabilities. So that is what we would like to see in your plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry about cutting you off before. Thanks for those additional comments, very useful. Councillor Scott.
It's almost an oxymoron, isn't it, that we're here for communities, but we want trucks and stuff. So this photo here, is this Byrnes Street?
Yeah, that's Byrnes Street. That's our crossing that we have to cross to get to school. Yeah. So when you're coming down off that hill.
So in terms of the roads that you talked about, so this is Byrnes Street, Lincoln Road, and Morehouse. So which is the one that really knocks you around most? Is it Byrnes Street?
Byrnes Street.
And so that's where you talked about your community being split in half by the motorway. Okay. A few transport people in this room that need to take note of that.
Councillor Marshall.
Kia ora, thank you, and thank you for your submission. I've got two related questions. I'm just checking that you've done a similar submission to City, and also in regards to the community apart through these roads, would different means of crossing those roads, like a raised pathway as an example, make your community feel more connected and feel safer and more confident using or crossing those large thoroughfares?
Yes, so we have submitted to council on this. So Waka Kotahi has talked to us about bridges and subways. The difficulty for us is the number of vulnerable people in our community. So we have a lot of people with disabilities. And also, I mean, Addington is a vibrant, diverse community, but diversity is an interesting mix. So there are some unusual people in our community. So subways don't feel safe for us. So putting our people under the subways doesn't feel like a good solution. I mean, who really wants to walk in the dark underneath when you feel vulnerable? Yeah, it's not a community building solution. Yeah.
Councillor Pauling.
Thanks. I know the crossing well. I take my risks on it myself on my bike, going down the cycleway. So my question was similar about what engagement you've had with, what do you have with Waka Kotahi and obviously CCC, but Waka Kotahi. And is that adequate for you?
Yeah, so Waka Kotahi is making their plans, but they haven't put them out for consultation yet. So, but we do have contact with them. They know that we want to be involved in their planning. So their plans will come out in the second half of the year, they said, for consultation. So our community board is advocating for us to make sure that their consultation process is really hears our communities. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very timely presentation, and I'm happy to talk with you further over the issue, of course. But I just wondered how you see it. I'll just let you know, like, yes, I lived in Addington in the 1970s as a young student and actually protested against the what we called the motorway. So in many ways we've lost, but sadly. But what I just wondered, you referred to a preference for a lane for high occupancy vehicles and for buses. And I just wondered where ideally you would like to see the freight go with the big trucks. And I guess I'm, without putting words into your mouth, I'm just wondering how you might see the potential for the railway through that area to be upgraded so that in fact freight goes on the rail, and how strong, what way you would see, how you would see that option.
Yeah, I think I mentioned just briefly in there, we would like to see the Rolleston Inland Port utilised and all freight going onto trains and through to Littleton. That would be amazing. Yeah, I think the infrastructure's there, just needs to be utilised. I don't know what money you need to put into it, but it'd be great.
Thank you, Joe and Ruth, for your presentation. Very much appreciated, and thanks for coming. Our next submitter is Fiona Bennetts, submission 943. Fiona, I note that you've got your presentation. Do you have any other information that's in addition to your original submission?
I think the slides are kind of a summary of everything.
When you're ready to go, it'll be 10 minutes and then the bell will ring at 9 minutes. Great, thank you.
Kia ora koutou, my name's Fiona Bennetts. I live in Harewood, and I'd just like to start by tautokering what's been said before with airport noise and the soil and the rivers and all of the stuff that's come before me. I deal with all of that despite living in Harewood and as well as living in Harewood, so absolutely agree with what's been said already. My number one thing is transport emissions. I'm a cyclist both competitively and recreationally, and I commute by bike. And not enough has been done to reduce emissions, and we need to really crack down on it. It's now or never kind of thing, like the world is going to end kind of thing. So I'd really like what you've put in your long-term plan is great, but I think we can go further. The electrification of buses, we need to look at ferries as well. We need to get the freight on trains, like's been said before. We need to, I don't know if we can reduce what vehicles can go where in terms of the trucks, like we've seen through Addington, having weight limits on roads, and having more like T2 lanes and things like that is great, but also that there needs to be policed, because I've seen many people using them on the new Waimakariri River when they're not in two plus vehicle occupancy. So I'd really like to see passenger rail all around the South Island and obviously beyond, but we're really missing out here. I caught the last train down to Dunedin way back in 2002. And it's really sad that we don't have that option. And I'm going to cry now. Sorry, I got really upset with the river presentation earlier. It's just so sad.
It's okay. Just take your time. It's no worries. Yeah.
Agreeing with the Addington ladies with the greenfield subdivisions and building more and more in the Selwyn district, we're not catering enough to transport options other than vehicles. We need to have, other than motor vehicles, I should say, we need to have way more options for cycling. And the buses need to be used more. And I don't know how we get more people onto buses, but it just has to happen. We need to get a passenger rail going out to Robertson, out to Rangiora, beyond if we can. It's just, it's so urgent, but people aren't taking this seriously enough. And there's also opportunities for cycle tourism that we could catch on to with COVID and everything. We've seen a massive uptake of people using the cycle trails all around the country. And we can continue to build more. I know there's some happening down around Timaru, but there's a massive opportunity to catch into the crowd with the cycle tourism and then make cycling just an everyday thing like it is in the Netherlands. My next big thing is agriculture. So like was being said earlier with regards to soil and rivers, we are not doing enough to protect our rivers, to protect our soil, and ultimately all of our food production is at risk. As the climate warms, all of our food production is at risk of being decimated by this. I don't need to read off the slides, obviously you can read that, but we need to do more. A big thing is probably dietary change. I think the dairy industry realises that people are moving away from dairy, and we need our industry to reflect that. We need people to be educated about alternative choices, safer choices, more environmentally friendly choices, and we need to stop all the coal that goes into those dairy factories. The land use is terrible. We've got to save our rivers. We've got to save our air. The methane levels, it's crazy. It needs to be taken into account. If we don't reduce emissions in the next 5 years, we are doomed. So just some lovely pictures out to ocean and some random river with some lovely people enjoying bicycling. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Fiona. Maybe just a couple of questions. You okay for that? Councillor Hans.
Thanks, Fiona. We can tell that you care very much. Just in terms of your comments around public transport, you've mentioned getting more funding from NZTA for making better bus services. If we weren't able to get more funding from NZTA, would you still like us to progress doing more work in the public transport space and funding that from rates, or would you prefer that you think the burden that would be too high on the community?
Yeah, so if you can't get funding from central government, then I think absolutely it needs to come from rates. I think there are people that drive their cars everywhere that can afford to spend more money on helping the less fortunate, especially use buses. I don't know why more people can't get free buses, not just the Gold Card members, but community services cards, whatever it is, there needs to be more access and cheaper access or free access, ideally, for buses. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Jenny?
Look, I want to thank you very much for coming in, and emotion's good. So I think we should all accept that, we need emotion at things like this because things affect people. So thank you, sincerely. I was just wondering if you've got some good ideas about how we might be able to convince or encourage people to get out of their cars. What do you think the best strategy for us to do is around that?
That's an excellent question. As a regular bus user myself, I find that having the free time to check your emails or do whatever, like even just interacting with strangers, I strike up all sorts of conversations on the bus, especially if I'm going out to Rangiora, because it takes a while. But yeah, like there's so many opportunities to interact with society or to get more done in your life because you're not stuck behind a wheel in traffic. So I think people just don't know it until they've tried it.
Councillor Clearwater.
Thank you very much, Fiona, for your submission, because you've given us some really strong messages. And I just wanted to wonder if you might be able to elaborate a wee bit on the uniform annual general charges and your comments there, because you're really saying that they should be progressively targeted. I just wondered, and clearly, just wondered if you might elaborate on what you've written.
This was a while ago. I think it was more to do with, yeah, like the people that have more money based on the amount of money they spend on a house should pay more than those who have less money.
Just if you could add a wee bit to that, because I guess what we also have is we have a whole of valuable farms with very high capital valuation, which are like businesses. I'm just wondering how you might see that uniform annual general charge being applied to them, because many of them, in fact, will have less because of the charges we put in.
Yes, so I think businesses can afford to pay more rates, and so those charges should reflect what their annual turnover is, perhaps instead of property value or something like that.
Great, thank you very much, Fiona. Much appreciated. Our last submitter for this morning is Jim Turpin. It's Jim. Thank you, Jim. And I understand, Jim, that you've also sent some additional information in, which will just, it'll just be given out to councillors now. Thank you very much. Yeah. Jim, when you're ready, you have 10 minutes and the bell will go at 9 minutes. And when you're ready, just press the button in front of you on the right-hand side. Be great. Away you go.
Right, well, I'm glad you've got that. I'm sorry you haven't had a chance to read it beforehand, because as you'll see, I've put this in, I only put in a very hasty submission to begin with before I wanted to address the issue I wanted to address, which is the very first one, and previously the democracy, and it's to do with the air control. Well, I think you've already answered that for me, because the gentleman over here asked, has that review been done yet? And apparently it hasn't. So I guess when it's done, because I just really want democracy in this place to do it. Well, first of all, let me just try and get you on side by saying I do understand that it's not easy, before I put you offside, because it's not very easy for you. It's not very easy, a lot of things in life, and it must be very difficult for you to hear all these things, when a lot of them, and the ones I've listened to, they're all generalities. There's no specific thing, change this, delete that, put this in, here's the money in the plan, get the rates down or anything like that. So I do understand it's all very difficult. And it reminds me of getting here today. I'm driving up the street here and it says, as he can, yep, visitors. So I do a right-hand turn, I go up the drive, this is great, I'm going to get a car park. Road stopped. And I thought, well, pickle me. So, oh, look, staff, turn right, go down this thing, right? And I go down there and door's locked. Try to back out, there's obstacles all over the place. Almost hit things. And so, in many ways, that's the general impression of ECAN with a lot of the population, including me in times, as you'll find when you get to read my thing. Right, okay, but I do understand it's not easy, and it's an earlier speaker said something about they struggle to find through the things, and one of my comments at the back is I tried to search on things, I can't find them. The last speaker talked about the change in annual charges. Well, I thought I'd try and say something about it, because this second part is only an afterthought. I really just want to talk about the airport controls. and democracy and fairness, because I know the city airport has had preference that general residents haven't had. Okay then, so now where am I? Yeah, so it was a late thing, but I got more angry and angry as I was reading it, and I started reading things in the paper that says, but not everyone's paying 24.5%. You know, most of them are only paying 3%. And I thought, well, what a wimpish sort of statement. Is the increase 24.5% or isn't it? And yes, it is. So we're having our political statements coming out and saying, well, look, okay, the voters next time won't worry because they've only got 3%, right? So we'll forget about the people who are going to pay 70 or 80%. I'll be paying 24%. I only live 1 kilometre away from the edge of the city, or I'm presumably paying 2 kilometres from the edge of the city, you're paying 3% presumably, and that's compounded 70% over 10 years. Okay, and so I started getting angry, and I thought, when I saw that really, and after I put in my initial submission, I thought, yeah, now I know a couple of instances where I've had dealings with ECAN, where I think they wasted money. There's been fiscal mismanagement, right? So I thought, yeah, bugger it, excuse me, I will tell them about it, right? Because it just doesn't make sense to me. So, and I do make a point, I had no personal gain out of these 2 things I'd had interactions with, but 2 interactions, 2 bad things where I thought there was fiscal, that's 100% as far as I'm concerned. So maybe we should look at costs rather than look at what you're going to spend. I know expenditure and doing the things is, but I can't work through the plan. I just don't know what it is, and I couldn't give you constructive criticism on all the things you want to do. So I thought, well, I'll tell you. So the first one was due with Quarrying Company, who wanted the mine below the general high, the recorded high water level, right? You all know that. There's a metre safety area, and there's things like that. Everyone tried it from 6 or 7 years ago to get all the quarrying companies, and it was rejected. A couple of people objected and wanted to try it again, and ECAN supported them, right? And I thought, this isn't right. So I put in an objection with some other people. It ends up that I ended up the only objector of all of these people against ECAN and against Selwyn Quarries, which is a Fletcher Challenge company, right? And I kept on going, and in the end, I got hold of the City Council, and I got hold of the Canterbury District Health Board, who weren't parties at this appeal, and I said, well, what do you think? This ECAN crowd haven't even asked you what you think. You're objectors to the original things, right? And they thought, we're against it. So the date, the 10th of May, is there, and I thought, well, at that stage, ECAN must pull out. Well, they must go. I didn't. I said, go and ask them, go and get them to agree with it, and I'll go away. And they wouldn't, for whatever reasons, who knows? I have no idea what your people were doing, why they carried on. We carried on for another 18 months. They got criticised, I say in here, because a judge had the sense, nothing to do with the ECAN, to say in a minute, what did he say? He said something apparently, oh God, apparently rather embarrassing position that CRC found itself in. And ECAN got up itself and said, you can't say that about us, right? So they took the Environment Court to the Environment Court to get the minute removed. Now, it doesn't really matter whether they did or not. It's not a constructive part of the appeal. It's just a word, right? It's an ego thing. And they lost. So what they do then, ECAN then filed a case against the Environment Court to the High Court of New Zealand to get it changed, all on taxpayers and ratepayers' money, right? So they did that, and they got beaten again, and they still wouldn't pull out. I kept saying to them, go and get the city's approval, go and get the health board's approval, and they wouldn't go to them. They just wouldn't go, but we kept on going through the bloody courts, and so I thought, after I'd filed this, I'll find out what it cost us. So I got hold of ECAN, and they very good. They quickly as they could. They told me what it was, and I listed there what it was. So it's about 76 grand after that date of wasted money. So the one occasion I tried to do something.
Can I just, you're sort of going through a consenting process issue. Are you able to focus on something else rather than that specific topic? Yeah, maybe just leave that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, off.
Sorry, can I
just get the Chief Executive just to...
I'm very happy to have a separate conversation around the specifics of what you raised. That's not an issue at all. It's more that in this context, with regard to the LTP hearings, it's quite important with regard to previous engagement with courts or otherwise that we not have that conversation here. I appreciate the comments with regard to financial management, and if there are other items in the LTP or examples that aren't specific to hearings or consents, then perhaps we could hear those. So it's really just the specifics, which I'm happy to have with you.
Just stayed on. Well, yes, I've offered to go further and go into this with whoever, and I'm not sure who you are, but hello, and that's very nice of you to say so. Yeah, but I said it's not easy for you, and it's not easy to comment on what you're going to spend all your money on. I do object to the 24.5% and just brushing it off as well. It doesn't affect most people, so we can get away with it, right? Well, really, then, if I take those out of there, I've got very little to say. I must say, I was very interested in the uniform annual charges. I put a little note there. I thought, oh, well, seeming I'm into this, I may as well see what they say, what is the thing, because it came up on the screen as I was putting it in. And I thought, oh, well, I'll see what it says about the charge. And I couldn't find it. I searched through the bloody thing. Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. I searched through the thing and I couldn't find it. And I've got 200 references to some other word, and I couldn't find. So I don't even know what the changes to the thing. And I would say anyone that went onto your website, a very earlier person said it's so hard to find what you're doing and what you're spending your money on. I've got to agree 100% with that. So I couldn't comment on that. No, well, that's it for me now then. I'd love you to ask me something.
Thank you, Jim. Do we have any questions, Mr. Turpin? Councillor Pauling?
Yeah, I'm interested in your view on a UAGC. Did you find, so you don't know what it is, the UAGC?
That's the annual general charge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's uniform annual general charge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you?
No,
you never managed to.
What the changes are.
But do you understand what it is, though?
I know what it is.
Yeah.
I mean,
Button again, please, Jim.
Say that charge the rich people more.
Just your button, Jim. Sorry.
So I'm sorry.
The question is, the proposal was to move it up from what it has been. So, yeah, can you tell me your view on?
I'm sorry. So what is it now?
I think it's $25 and it's going up to 55 around about.
Well,
and your button again, please.
Well, if that's it, you haven't put it up enough, because people use our facilities, not properties, right? So a lot of these things, you talk about you're putting up your rates 24.5%, and I'm not sure whether they're so the City Council are using some similar percentages for another thing, and you talk about that 93% of the people aren't paying anything or a figure like that, and doing it. But in the area, the big rural areas, there's not the density of population. It's the people I know Margaret Thatcher got put out on this, in case you're interested in any of the poll tax type thing, right? It should be a higher charge for a property, or there should be something about the number of people that are using the facilities or whatever it is where the cost lies. Okay, then. So I don't know what it is. I don't know what would be fair, but no, I'd be against. I'd agree you up in it, but it's pathetic from 25 to 50.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much for coming in today, and thanks for your submission and your additional stuff. Chief, Stephanie is the Chief Executive Council. Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors, and I think it's lunch now, so we're due to be back here about 1 o'clock.